That's all. Yeah, we do.
So,
Last lot that morange then patches here to song it's up a patch any halam cosons.
let's order much. Let's order much.
Then it now that the morange young age chick any gomba that the su college here one.
No, so.
But that that Tata Nugget that's all that any jagali or a shirgurla, Tim Morang Shigo Samare.
Let's order much.
Namjago, then it Tadanga so Tata Anne Gomba, that up in the Travasego Mareta, Anne. Any Anita Jagarso to settle any Pomog monkeys and Lavado.
Oh, monk, girl monk.
What the message the Tata pay any Bialy like my order, Koto here down, the Tatanga to Gomba down, Lobda down, and if some sort of tip more that I share some other thing, any pa any children at the any mixer on the table, started Tajanona. Being a young of the shit,
So I understood, as Julie introduced a little bit about me and my monasteries, and I understood, so I didn't need that to be translated back into Tibetan for me. But I did want to add one thing that she may not have known about is that my primary main monastery is actually Namchak Gompa is in Siliguri, which is in India. And there I have a nunnery and over 100 nuns, or as the Indian people like to call them, girl monks. So we have over 100 of them, and we have a school, and we have meditation retreat facility, and also a full, monastic institute there. So I just wanted to share that, and you can of course learn more about that online, but I wanted to also add that that's one of my principal monasteries.
Any Dinita, Mama Conzoda, Yamdunga, Tata, any Pacha Ojen Doji Dana in some way, Kawaina Tini, Pardog, Cola, Tenetics, Matoya, Dordur, which in the chick chevre.
That's much.
They are conto with the Pacha in my total club to the Zodua. That young and to Miss Getata, any a low cashing around to Tita that Tipinita and around.当我们说他去看见嘛，就说嘛，开始写着我就你妈接了写着的，他对的呢，我做样有人摸着我接了就别这接近的，呀，都是接着的。
So some of you may, I kind of think we may have already met before in the context of, and I think it was at Urgyen Dorje then, when I did give a teaching on the Bardo at that time, short teaching, and some of you may have been gathered there for that. So actually, this particular book that is the basis of my teaching today, I wrote this after a long time of putting together in a very kind of organized and comprehensive manner all of the teachings of the Bardo. Whereas, when I'm called to teach on the Bardo before that, it was kind of just like unplanned. It was like, oh, what do I sort of more spontaneous, whatever I can remember, I would just share little bits and pieces here and there. And this book represents years of hard focused efforts to consolidate and combine the totality of the teachings in a very systematic manner. And it's a really long time that we, worked on this to produce it. So this book has all the systematic, organized teachings of the Bardo right here. So we can't obviously get through the whole book today. There are over 200 pages, but I'll at least focus on the most principal points, kind of going through the main themes.
Bardo getting Tudor Tasakore, Halam, Kalinda, Halam, Kalin Shiro, Pacherich, Mancha, the double,
So the principal kind of root text that formed the basis for this teaching was mostly Karsum Lingpa, who's very almost like exactly the same as the Karling Shitro, which the Shitro means 100 peaceful, wrathful deities from the Karma Lingpa cycle. So it's very similar to that, almost exactly like verbatim.
다티 돈에 드는 가란 다다디 천재를 보니 눈이 다다디 깔랭이 히로다 되네 다다 셀레 나조랑 로그 제비 바도가 트이다 되네 대나게 dunyo를 보진 제비 바도 트이다 되네 대나게 이시라마라스가 바도 트이 망보지 톱이어라 되네 되네 가란 게다 빼나 랩제는 샌들을 지 트로트베지 고고도 다 되네 샌들을 다지 깔레 카보 용사래 되네 소다다 Bardos reva jepsa de Bardos mato reva jepsa mando ten teki chelo misa je lobjun che go samni tene ta lobjun che ba chala ya pe tini ngarang te gas ke pecha chipul tin lobjun che na ya ngara bie yang ro do tene sonda tene tapto ro che la pa che ba yina tene ngarang ya tempo yong do tene pa te ro che che yang nga so yan la ya des pen thosa de samji che ne kulong tene che ke thoni tene nge di yong de zombi da de des.
And also, I received many extensive Bardo teachings from my teacher, Kinze Rinpoche, including on the Garling Shitro, which is the 100 peaceful, wrathful deities from the Karma Lingpa cycle, as well as the Bardo teachings from Tsele Natso Rangzhol, and also the Bardo teachings from Dujum Rinpoche, the Yeshe Lama Bardo teachings, all the different compendium of teachings. I received all of these from my master. And so, I was thinking, one of the sort of motivations or the driving forces of putting this together in a book was I thought, well, my first goal is to attain liberation, enlightenment in this very lifetime. But then I thought, that's very difficult. It might be a little hard. So I better start to learn about the Bardo so that I can be prepared, as my sort of backup plan in case I don't make it enlightened in this lifetime. So I decided I'm going to really focus on studying and learning about the Bardo so that I'm ready, to be liberated in that place. And so, with studying as it goes, when you just leave it on the pages of the text and you just read the pecha, but you don't really take the time to imbibe and internalize it, you can forget. So I thought, better to kind of gather my understanding by having to write it down and put it together in this book. That helps me to stabilize my understanding of the Bardo. But at the same time, I thought maybe it might be of some benefit to other people. And I genuinely wanted to share that. And so that's kind of how the sort of story behind how the Bardo book came about.
Hola, so tenita cheranzo nga so nang chugin rodang da tumbi gone tenita cheranzo tango ya mendrach pironans yana gone tene mendrach tene nge tene ya chobar joba ta ene ta mixe ke ta chi nga so kunong kunjo jera ba ta ji man rone tene ta rogo ya ba songza te so na ta ta bo me la de jeba ji go sa mari tene sa yi bu chira wo tene se chene riksa es.
So in accordance with the traditional and proper form for receiving the sacred Dharma teachings, we start by the students reciting the 7-branch offering prayer followed by the short mandala. I don't have to do the long one, just the short one, Sashi Puchu should be fine. And then the formal request for teachings. And then following that, I will do my spiel of the prayers and offerings, and then we will begin. And again, obviously the reminder for all of us to make sure we have the right motivation and the pure respectful conduct while listening to the teachings. So for the mandala, you don't have to do the long one, just the short one, but for the sake of the respectful interdependence and for the sake of the tradition, we'll start with that. So we'll start with prayers before teachings. Chak Tsawa Dan Chujin Shakwa Dan Jisu Yerang Kushin Sowai Gewa Jungse Dagi Chisaba Tamshi Zobe Janchuchi Sa Shi Buchi Jokshi Medo Zhang Rira Lingxi Nide Genpa De Sangye Shinto Mide
Amda shingdo jewara sho edam goro ren mamnenga kamnari nami
Semje Namge Samba Dan Lui Chera Chida War Chechung Temun Tebai Chigi Korlo Gordo So. In English, in accordance with the intentions and faculties of the sentient beings, please turn the wheel of the Dharma of the greater, lesser, common, and extraordinary vehicles.
Du some Sanje Dam Jejang or Jangurjam Suchada, Garden Sonda Manjibe Dani Pango, Lamatan Bishop Jepem, Dortman Mebala, Gosom Kuba Chimbum, Govir of the Tute Kobe, Chatalo, Jepsacho. Hingle of the so, Java Gonjur and then Dayaju, Kanza Melika, Rabjurpa, Tambijo, Tony Tarzabi, Jusum Lamanamla, Kucha, Omichi, and Japoran. To some Sanji Gunyong near Chukun was on the bed, I will let me have la cocha Nilo, whatever is Shinji lows. Hola Sotenita, Lion, Padania Bisim Jetan, just Haji Jacomot Bracha. The Yechedo Tenichu, Shitonara Tungo Padit, such a tubarando, Shijawa Tini. Tini Shude, Teniti. Jonah Teniching around Zog Chakapardo. Determina tenita caresere any chica pardon chicasoya da any chisik pardola trovata. Tenita our madonna sergi pardo. Tamaya tenita majona tasba. Pardon it tenita ngarazoki rangi trukushin hamla wang. No teningaso Georgian and Donat kosom jishinkam. Mondo chip tobashi tiego te chedo tambichu samon the send the Turkin the Yamson level you go and be samba shaku to talk about the song December shows.
So please give rise to the purest bodhicitta motivation that feels for the sake of all sentient beings whose numbers are so infinite that they are equal to space, for all of them to attain the precious and authentic state of complete enlightenment, complete awakening. For that purpose, I am going to listen to these teachings on the Bardo, these teachings which are called the natural liberation, freedom upon hearing the instructions on the source concerning the Bardo teachings and states from the cycle of the peaceful, wrathful deities that stirs the lowest depths of the hells from its depths. And in listening to this, I pray that I shall accomplish for all sentient beings the ability to awaken at the time in which we are going through the dying process. That's the first Bardo, the Bardo of the dying process. That's the best ideal scenario, to be liberated in that state. But if we are not awakened and liberated in the state of dying, then immediately upon death, then can we be liberated in that state of the Bardo of the Dharmata? And then if not liberated in the Bardo of the Dharmata, where the absolute true nature shines forth, may we be liberated in the clear light luminosity Bardo with the visions and so forth. And then if not liberated there, may we be liberated in the Bardo of becoming, where we begin to move on to the next reincarnation. And in that way, may we be liberated in a pure land, such as empowered into the Nirmanakaya pure land. In short, may we achieve through these teachings the ability to be freed, liberated in any of the pure lands or the three kaya pure lands. And for that, give rise to the supreme and precious bodhicitta, great compassion, motivation as the basis for listening to these teachings.
Hola, so that dig it in the main thing, send the carrier, any Chito Nara Tuntoli, Padu Sachi, Padu Satsik, Padu Satsik. Oh, that's a thing, Tela, Tinikotomata, any main the Caratayo, Tubarang Rorsi, or that Turuchi, yes.
No, so the teaching, the title is the that which stirs the depths of the hells from the peaceful and wrathful deity cycle that empties the depths of the hells. And it's the Bardo Zati, which means the root text, the root teaching, the source teachings on the Bardo. And the name is called Tebarangro, that which is liberation upon hearing. And the title of this is the 100 peaceful deity, 100 peaceful wrathful deity instructions for dredging and emptying the depths of the hells.
Hola, so that Niba Chopper Jobatella. Any tongue around Zoge Caresse. Oh, that Tinomata, it's you get them and you get check them along and regret. Chopper Jobatella, Ranrik Demi Nilo, Rang or Rainy, Hito, Rangur Kunduzangoshi, Rangyong Sanjitella Deus. That telling around so Carresena, and 다 ngazo ye ne lo chodori ma ra ba ini tende so da kun de zang bo de ye to lo chodwa yin zang da ye to de chodwi sang ji kun de zang bo de la cha cha lo se de
And so now we come to what are called the formal verses of veneration or homage that precede the author's main text. And I will just read from these. So the Tibetan you heard, the English translation reads, naturally self-knowing awareness is the principal way in which things abide with the recognition that this is one's true nature. In the immediacy of that fundamentally unconditioned nature, there is natural freedom called samantabhadra, naturally occurring Buddhahood to which I bow. So the meaning of this 4-line verse of homage is remembering that in our ultimate true nature, that has always been the truth from the very beginning, there is no duality of confusion or liberation. In Gunda Zangpo, the primordial Buddha, Samantabhadra is liberated into that primordial nature of awakening by recognizing, liberating in his own nature, in the own basic ground of that recognition of the true nature beyond anything having to be liberated. And so that's the meaning of that first line of homage.
히도스 트로바테 소탐제다 조럽 챈들라 트로바세고라
Yes.
메이스 꺼닌데 나더니 가래 땡거 열었으나 다 애니 상지다 샘견 생인데요 되는 가란 저거 위에 돌아 초줄메스 위에난 그 토니 되는 상지다 샘견 이 차송바 송장 닝마바겠다 팀모이 비셔서 가래 열었으나 위도니 마 참바니 좀 위도서 야 마도르세 되는 바데 차상 바도레 마도 얘네 양 바도스게 따당 가서 지당데 예직더니 요 말이다 띠발라 띠발라 지도 자당 빼 망고 요래라 바도 위에 시에그래 바도 니 시에그래 바도 조 시에그래 바도 nga 시에그래 나 마다 시에그래데 이나야 대 탐지 너르나 되는 가서 빼데 니 깨기 나나 되는 말랑 가서 명화 탐지 아니 말람 니 발라 제발 매바 나yin 되는 상마 거서 되는 바도 찍는 거 제가 요래 되는 성장 초르마명비 상지도 쳐버려 다 되는 가서만 풀sorte 근데 다 저거다 막 시에게 인생 시에게 요래스
That's one. And so ideally, to be able to awaken in this lifetime, to be able to awaken to the natural freedom in this lifetime, and doing that by recognizing, awakening back into the original ground of being, the primordial ground of being. And specifically what this is showing is that the differentiation between Buddhas and sentient beings from the perspective of our original basic ground nature, the primordial state of our true nature, there is no distinction, there is no delusion or awakening. The existence of the appearance of Buddhas versus sentient beings, that arises only on the level of appearances, appearance phenomena, which is the dynamic radiance or the natural appearance arising from out of this basic ground nature. On that level of the display from the basic ground, there is the appearance of Buddhas and sentient beings and various states. But from the ultimate truth, primordial ground nature state, there is no sentient beings. There is no nothing to be liberated. There's no delusion. And so actually, one specific and unique quality and teaching of the Nyingma, the early translation school teachings, is this recognition that Bardo means from the moment that we forget or we deviate from that basic ground primordial nature, everything until we get back to recognizing our primordial nature is Bardo, intermediate state. And even though we understand the Bardo as having different Bardos, right? Like the teachings generally say, oh, there's like 2 main Bardos, or some of them say there are 4 Bardos, 2 Bardos, 6 Bardos. Some teach 5 Bardos. The idea that there's many different Bardos or these intermediate states, but from the ultimate perspective, actually, Bardo simply means from whence we have sort of deviated or lost touch with this basic nature, this primordial ground of being. All that is Bardo until we return to recognizing our true nature. And so really there's one Bardo in that perspective. Just like, for example, when you sleep and you go through a series of dreams in the sleep, different dreams, different frames of dreams. But from the perspective that it's all the illusion of the dream state. Until you wake up, that's all just the dream. Then you just say that's the dream. And so in the same way, this is the idea, the Bardo being like, that's why we pay homage to the primordial Buddha, to the recognition, primordially recognizing that primordial state. And then after that, then we go into explaining like how that confusion, sort of how we go through that confusion that causes us to lose recognition of that, our basic nature.
그래서 단이바 바르도게 접소래 간데스도 바르도 간데스는다 바르도 캬브레스 네 예비마도 트리르송 데레 초난 거왔네 통다 바르미 가미비 코르니 비도 마도바 바르도 쳔보 용스토 다데 바르도 뭐여서 맞대.
And so now we explain like how do this Bardo states, how do they come about? And that's what the next verse explains. So failure to realize that timeless ground of being causes us to err into the basis of confusion. So failure to realize the basic ground of our being is the first basis of our confusion. And from this come the perceptions that are born from that confusion, delusory perceptions, and that is samsara, cycling without beginning, end, or interruption, like a whirling firebrand, until they revert to freedom in the immediacy of the ground of being. Until that time, the major intermediate states are present and are entirely ensured.
예나 발도 조송 예세도 제소 방향 더 제케르세 맹아로 인데히자 다딜 기단 그다 해서 민다바 다 바제 조행에도 닝마레
맞아.
다 바죠 기단 것들이 대시하고라
맞아.
예 발도 예시야요래 근데 젠체 발도서도 찍히야요래 다 되니 너나 되니 계속 강의 있잖아 내 되니 좀다 맹아가 로인세 다 랑로인도 해버자세 다 되라 이에나 바도 이게 두개 바도 두송이에 계속 망요 더지체 맹아 로인도 해자세 다 돼. 더 이해하셔 봐.
That's what I'm saying. And so next is setting forth like the classifications. And so I will read it. It says, if these were categorized or classified, the intermediate states are 6, 3, 4, 1, and so forth. Despite all these classifications, there is one point at which they all agree, all converge, and therefore this teaching that I will give, I will explain according to the tradition of the pith instructions, the tradition of Menga oral instructions. And so basically this says like there are different categorizations. You can categorize the Bardos. For example, the Nyingmas tend to talk about the 6 Bardos, or there's the teachings on the 4 Bardos, or you can say the 2 Bardos in terms of the Bardo of birth and death. And then there's 1 Bardo, right? So it depends on the mode at which the manner or the style you're teaching. But my tradition that I will be teaching from is from the tradition of oral instructions and the meaning that is shared among all this different numbers of Bardos.
그래서 다 뒤집대 마다양 데마 위지바기 나네더니 다 바도 피잉은 증소는 돌드 바다 바드스다 티파체 로차레 데네 바도 위에 지바시야바 타데 바드 몰람다 지빈 욕도 바나바 솜레세
나서
데네 타다 당보디 시행인스
나서 뭐지? Okay, so now we get to the actual main introduction. And so the text is going to introduce the outline first. There's 3 main topics, a concise definition of the intermediate state, the general overview, followed by a detailed explanation of the 4 specific Bardo or intermediate states, and finally an aspiration prayer and like summary of what the intermediate states mean. So I'll start with the first section, which is the general understanding of the Bardo.
다 타당하라 저거 바도다 때에서 예버시에바라 디니타 바도 레리기 토르마 슈 간데스 시행인세나 께르 바도 시에바스타 다디 하람 로드 조레 에니 께르 바도 시에바 이윈 까달리 yendu nama tamche yendes ta yin kada lipa ini thonje tini yendu nama tamche es yendes deyang yin ne pyo lar yanang ga tho yanang kada ga tho do je cheni 마도지 바르도 여바 탐지 바르도 찍세다 바르도 찍 다니도 되레스.
That's all Rinpoche. That's all. And so the first explanation of what we should understand by the meaning of Bardo, and we kind of already touched on this just now, which is that it is what all the appearances that appear to us as something other, that are actually just simply arising, projecting from out of the primordial, pure, basic space nature, the primordial ground. All of these appearances are the Bardo. And it is simply the movement, or the sort of the movement, the energy from this basic ground, this basic space, basic ground, and arising again in the form of appearances. And so until all these like proliferation and arisings of appearances are withdrawn, drawn back into, or sort of reawaken back into that basic primordial, basic space ground, all of that is one single Bardo, one single intermediate state.
So that teacher the comes penata, Tatang around the Tatang Azotang Arzopena, any main Rovatean, Pardore, Rido Navatean, Pardore, Deneta, te tampiele teaching Azota, Pasik, whatever, Tata Deni Pari, she young, the teaching in young Arazo, Palata, Tendawachi, any Sendegin Nawate trial, Deni young, Chimigeta, Chingazo. 나와도 무슨 마르크 발라 르데바 데라다 기다 망치시고 바도스는 데려와 너는 대 탐지에 된다 가라는 소고 바도 니셰다 시에고요레스.
And so like as humans, like when we understand like the Bardo state, like when we die, we know that we go into the Bardo, the intermediate state. And so all of the appearances of this present life's phenomena, that's also the Bardo. And then when we pass away and we're entering into that intermediate state between rebirths, before we take our next body, our next birth, that's the more common understanding when we talk about the Bardo. What most people understand as Bardo is intermediate state, but all of these are Bardos. That Bardo means the intermediate state in between.
다양 바도 니스드니 시에서도 간레레세나 위엘리 위엔항도 샤비 꽃도 신감제 낭샤네 서야 답이 나와줘라 맞아 답이 나와다 마답이 나와서는 이어라
맞아
원하가 좀 꽃당 이 시지 낭샤네서 답과 춘이제 바도 당스 로족도 초비 나와 촌난 그 추담제네 마답 초비 바도데 바도 니서야
And so that was the explanation of like the one Bardo. Now for the explanation of the two Bardos, or the two intermediate states. It's simply all of the appearances, all of the appearance phenomena that arises out of wisdom, primordial wisdom, that is the appearance of the deity forms, the enlightened Bodhikayas, and the wisdom that arises as the spontaneous display from the basic ground of being. All of that is what we know as the pure aspect, which is the Bardo of Dharmata, the true nature of reality. And then there's the phenomena that are the arisings of confusion. And that's what arises as the sort of appearance phenomena perceived by and experienced as the phenomena of the beings of the six realms. And that's the six states of the ordinary beings. And that constitutes the impure Bardo. So we talk about pure vision and impure vision, or pure appearance, impure appearance. And so all that arises from the display of the primordial knowing awareness, that all that arises as kayas and wisdom, that's the pure phenomena. That's the Bardo of the pure appearance. And then all the phenomena that arises and is experienced by the sentient beings of the six realms, that's the impure phenomena, or impure appearance. So those are the two Bardos, as they are known, the Bardos of the pure appearance and the Bardos of the confusion.
양 아주 가르쳐나 바도 솜도 가르쳐 시작을 열었잖아. 랑이 끼니지 바도도 체가 동아리지 바도도 니 춘이 춘이 스비 바도도 솜잖아. 양 솜도 드니 양 시에바 지겨레스.
And there's also another tradition of teaching in terms of three Bardos. And the three Bardos are the Bardo of the natural state of birth and living, is also translated as the Bardo of this life. And then the Bardo of suffering, which is the Bardo of the dying state, the dying process. And then the third is the state of the Dharmata, or the true nature of beings, that sort of provides the basis for the transition to the future rebirth. So those are the three Bardos, and in that tradition of teaching in terms of three Bardos.
yang 파르 치비고 왕도 지나 랑이 끼니제 발도다 즉 체가 동하르제 발도다 니 춘이 어설제 발도다 좀 스발레제 발도데 세네 위르비어 바치 위르비어네 다양처럼 대단 위르드네 송그래서.
And there's another more common tradition of teaching in terms of four Bardos, and that is the Bardo of this life, or the Bardo of being, this present life's phenomena, and then the Bardo of suffering, which is known as the Bardo of the dying process. That's number 2. And number 3 is the Bardo of the Dharmata, which is known as the clear light or luminosity Bardo of being in the pure nature, or Dharmata. And that's the third Bardo. And then the Bardo of becoming or taking birth into the next life, which is the karmic process of transition into the future rebirth, which makes the fourth Bardo. So that's the tradition of four Bardos.
알았어. 다다 가서 깔랭이 시토당. 되네 가서 답에 다다 시토 코랑에서 시토 나라던 거. 그쪽에 sab이 되네 sabje 왕도 지나야 발도 조히고요래. 가르시고 발도 조치세요라. 랑이 끼니제 발도도 즉 되네 띠 물람제 발도도 니 삼대제 발도도 좀 치키 발도도 위에 균이제 발도도 nga 스비 발도기 되네 다 발도 족세다 발도 족식세 발도 족송이어레스.
And then there's, of course, from the tradition of the Garling Shito, which is the peaceful and wrathful deities, the natural freedom of enlightened intent, and then also the Narak, the one for dredging the depths of the hells. That one, both of those main root texts expose the Dharma, the teachings of the Bardos, in terms of an exposition of six Bardo states. And these are introduced as the Bardo of birth and living, the Bardo of dreaming, the dream Bardo, the Bardo of meditation, the Bardo of the dying process, the Bardo of the Dharmata, or the true nature of being, and finally the Bardo of becoming, or the Bardo of the transition toward the next rebirth. So those are the 6 Bardos taught in these root texts.
Voilà, tende songa da ini dorna te tamche danda dragola ngara kan yo mares te tamche teni chikmare de yores.
Yes. But in summary, all of these different numbers or ways of explaining the Bardo, there's no contradiction. They say the same thing.
다 드레스 너 트랭크스 보면아가 lok다 희게 인에서 가서 다 좀 발도 위에 나나 되네 발도 독도 줄 되제제네 아니 좀다 대 인에서 거래 men아가 lok다스.
And today, because the basis for this teaching is through the tradition of the oral instructions, or Menga Upadesha, so that teaching tradition is in terms of teaching 4 main Bardos, 4 intermediate states, and the 6 Bardos are, of course, condensed and subsumed within these 4. So I'll teach on the 4 according to the tradition of the oral instruction lineage.
그래서 다 티니고 좀 양때 도와티니 지휘에게 넣는 로인달라.
그래서 뭐지다.
니바 sabje 니바 발도 예지 버시야 생겼대나
나저로 뭐지
다 때니게 발도 담기 위에 왕도 네베 왕도 땅네스 근데 되게 나나 때네 발도 쪽대 추를 가서 되는 희야고요래 가르스나 랑이 끼니제 발도 찌게 나도 말라미야 발도 나 연구요래 삼대제 발도야 대가 연구요래
맞아
발도야 뒤나로 연구요라 뒤솜디 끼니제 발도 나는 출 두고래스 두고래.
And so now we get to the more detailed explanation of the 4 Bardo states according to this teaching. So we actually are already going to be covering the 6 Bardos, because the 6 Bardos can be subsumed in the 4. And here's how. First, you have the Bardo of this life, which is called the Bardo of birth, through the entire course of one's life. And that Bardo state already in this life, we have within that the Bardo of dreaming, the Bardo of meditation, and even the Bardo of the dying process. So those three Bardos are subsumed within the Bardo of this life.
Rowa Trupo Tamji, that Sama to any Sosuga, Linang Riva, Linang.
That's very much.
Linang Yember Songjiang, Nang Yor Jigla, Ridog Susu, Ridog, Rowa Susu, Nawa Tateper Chalrogo Yores. Any Deyang, then a better just the touching as any Chundrago Nubo Jigla, then Rowa Trogata to the Capsa. 근데 지금 가서 가시게 되는 배트께서 이네 다당가서 이네 세선도 봐 가시게 내선도 봐 가시게 늦어런도 봐 가시게 매단 나살런도 발라서 봤다고 나요를 찍라 얘네 소속의 레고 왕게 민라봐 이렇게 족차도고 여러봐스
So the next part is explaining how these bardos arise, the manner in which they arise. And for that, we have to understand that each of the beings of the 6 realms will experience phenomena according to that being's karmic projection. And so that's why the way that we experience and perceive appearances and phenomena differs depending on which of the 6 realms we are born into. And so even though the phenomena itself, the object might be, is the same essence, same nature, but how that object is seen and perceived is completely different depending on the karma of the being perceiving it. And that's explained by the 6 realms of beings experience the appearance phenomena completely differently. So for example, a single, like the phenomenon of water for some beings, like beings in our realm, is experienced as something that we must consume. And for other beings, it's experienced as the habitat and the place that one must live to survive. And for other beings, it's experienced as ambrosia or amrita, nectar. Others, it's experienced as molten lava and magma. Others experienced like pus and something, unpleasant. So this water phenomena, you see it's a single H2O, it's water, but it's perceived completely differently. Why? By the power of being's karma that causes them to experience the phenomena in accordance with that karmic projection.
Pena that tarn boltago mas ngarang so go luchi ko la tan digres. Ngarang so go lute ngaye samna ngaye leyin ngarang yin ngarang leyin sam de yores. Yena ya ngarang so go lute ge nangla semjen ta pet kesel te thanglen de ba do ta ta nga so. Ene 사야만 못 누가 대속에 아니 칼이 통고열에서나 고속에 니다 애네 고속에 세다 고속 강바다 고속 쌍겨다 근데 코랑도 롱바다고 통고열마도 나 찍을 리다고 통고요 말다.
That's what And we don't have to look far to get an example of this. We can take just our own physical body as the perfect example. So we perceive our physical body as the self. We say, this is me, I am this person, this body is my body. We identify with our physical body as ourselves. But if you think of all the billions of microbes, microscopic beings that live in our bodies at any given time, and we know that there are billions of microbial beings, organisms that live in our body that we can't see. All of these organisms, they see our same body not as the self, not as us, but as their home, as their country, as their environment, as their abode, as their food source. And so you see like different beings perceiving the same phenomena as something very different.
알아서 다양 나츠고 빼나 애니 나츠 잘라지를 닦고 시에 나츠 잘라지를 상담 보이나 애니 나의 교제 인계호대 선제 교제 인계호 차고 지보 젠 나츠고 르모 나츠고 거야바대 양 심제 무슨 빼데 힘들 차와들래 라구에 토는 말레저 녀와 부수소지 되네 되니까 생도서 담지 차상세 짝바 담지 참아 막 강는 로거다 대르데 아니 대 가르에서다 네 종소에레베 거기 가라레서다 돼
So example, like my table, maybe I really take very nice care of this table and I have it's nicely painted, it's very hard, it's got these properties, it's got this like design and this painting and this nice appearance, and it functions for me as a table. At the same time, you've got these tiny little wood animals, these tiny little insects that are so small you can't even barely see them. They're like a tiny hair on the tip of the finger, and they're inside the table and they're eating away at the wood, and they're filling their stomachs and they're going to the bathroom, and they're doing all of this inside the wood in the table. And then the question is it my table or is it their food?
아야 다 가르에서는 빼는 아기 친다 근데 또 다, 니, 다, ngāgi, ngārangi, chīn samdira, 다, ngāgi. Nāndā tā ngā yoya mārate, ngāgi, chīn. Zōng hiruzo yo. 다, khozuki tsama tabi dōrdar langni, 다, sāni. ngāchu tēne, zibo, chakbo, pē misiba, ngāchu sōjamda sātuko mārē. kāte sātopna ngāchu yogo mārē, ngāchu hiro gārē. khozo chūchō, 되게 거저 그 세네 말레장 녀와 신반 잠바제네 아무 차상 마트네 꼭그 떡과 땅이 차상 꼭을 사르도
Another perfect example is my throne over here. You know, I say, oh, this is my throne. Well, I don't even really exist. So, you know, but here I am saying, this is my throne. And so my throne here looks very, very solid, very nice, very stable. You know, it's very well put together. It's something we would say has some degree of stability and solidity. That's my throne, right? Well, all these tiny little wood mites, these wood insects that imagine like all of them slowly multiplying, eating away at the inside of the wood and my throne, and eating it and eating it and eating it. And, you know, they actually have the capacity to eat, digest, dissolve all of this solid wood of my throne. And as they're eating it, they're really perceiving it as this total nutrient-rich food that they can fully digest. It's soft and it's going into their systems flawlessly. Whereas if one of us were to try to eat my throne, we wouldn't be able to. Even if we managed to get it in our mouths, we wouldn't be able to digest it. And we're big people. And then you look at these tiny little microscopic mites, and they're able to dissolve this seemingly, you know, solid piece of wood that we call my throne. And they're able to dissolve it. They're able to digest it, metabolize it, and make it disappear.
다 때는 이렇게 좀 가르래서는 얘다 녀음도 semje 소설 레제 나와래서 강들 나츠게 착보대 고즈 녀모 얘네 빼는 나츠 쪽과다 짐에 바지 도배는 나츠 쪽과 짝과지 마 땅이 야버이는 당가 지마조는 나츠 현바 땡의 로네 저래 이 무슨 키라서 받아서 좀 심보 나르모 드만 좀 딱 가르지야도 하다
The takeaway from all of these examples, there's just one takeaway, and that is that everything is going to be appearing differently and experienced differently by the sentient beings according to their individual karma and their karmic projections. What for us seems very hard and solid, for the other beings is very soft and malleable. And for example, what to us is very putrid and repugnant, for another being is very attractive. So for example, take a piece of poop. We don't like the poop, the smell of the poop, the smell of the fart. The poop smell is something very repugnant to us. If we walk into a place where there's a freshly laid piece of poop, we're going to cover our nose. We're going to feel really disgusted, like from the depths of our being. We feel almost like nausea arising. because we don't like the smell of defecation, the smell of human waste. But then look at all the flies and the bugs and even the dogs that are naturally drawn to the smell of the poop. They go to the poop, they see it as delicious, nice, fragrant smell that they are drawn and attracted to. So they want to eat it sometimes. They want to sniff it and lick it. And they do all that to the poop that we are so disgusted by. Again, another example.
알았어. 다요. 나랑 저게 빼라. 다다다 나랑 저게 출비 나와. 생각들아. 출비 나와. 다다디 공도더니 데네. 니를 봐도 니 양이 도와. 어다데. 오나 다양아서 제니지 봐도 값어. 다 남절 받대 속에. 빼나 남절 봐. 냠내 봐. 냠내 봐더니 빼대. 어다 얘네 여러 봤다 가서 빼나 얘네 상하게 냠내 지게 강사 돈다 포모 대속 남걸라 양아 주베데 다다 내지도 거라서 스바 바도 가르사야 제네지 바도 그는데 여러 봐 어서 제네지 바도 나 얘네 양 코즈 남걸라 빼나 되는 가라서 얘네 나와 탐치 돈다 가라서 그지 얘네 라다 작마탄 비행아 대도 탐지 춘이제 랑당라 샤르니 야 마다비 나와생인데 고소라야 깨지게 매비 니급제야 도라 다 대양 가서 다 가서 그 다리나 가서 나는 요래 왔다 대저 망보 요래 다 대양 가려고 그래 다 대야도 발도 럽지라 그 발도 나는 대야 다도 이거 상이 그 발도 나는 대야 대대 다 대가 얘네 다 당가란즈 다 가르치고 그래서는 얘네 또 담긴 돈에다 코랑을 또 담기더니 춘이지로 봐 샤신 학벌도 얘네 때 돌아 빼내다다 미세게 곰잡 냠내 징에 대서라고 지게나 되네 코랑 거 빼도 쳐서 얘네 다다 디기 출발 때도 빼도 쳐서 상마 로스 줘봐 빼나 되네 빼도 쳐서다 대왕 말한데 봐 샘라 띵인생이 나바지 여더라 대대 다 대양 아주 찐이 봐도 되게 나는 혀대가 어려 그래서다 대를 딱 가서 띵생이 어서 발도 세나요 대를 세고 어려 가자 코에 발도 찐이 봐도 나 이거랑 가서
And so this is all from the perspective of confusion, from the perspective of the confused projections of sentient beings. That's how the Bardo, the Bardo of this living experience is perceived. But remember, we're talking about two Bardos, and from the other side of this, or the other frame to perceive this, is the Bardo of the pure appearance. And this is still the Bardo of the living state. But for those beings who are like secret mantra practitioners, who are, Vajrayana practitioners, the yogins and the yoginis, the practitioners of this path who have some level of realization and insight into the true nature and who are practitioners, well, they experience appearance phenomena very differently. And even though they're living in this lifetime, just like us, there are many of them among us who every experience of body, speech, and mind is experienced as the display of purity. So, for example, all this phenomena of this present life, they experience and interact with it as the display of the peaceful, wrathful deities. All appearances are deities' form, deities' body. All sounds that resound are the self-arising sound of mantra. And all thoughts and emotions and all the arisings that arise in mental phenomena arise to them as the display or the appearance of pure awareness dharmata. And so for these great beings of practitioners in their state, there is nothing impure that ever appears to them. Everything that appears, all appearances, sounds, and thoughts appear pure phenomena, pure appearance. There's many of these alive on this earth. And what do you call this state? Well, you kind of have to also call it the Bardo. It's intermediate state, right? But as it says in the text here, that all the hosts of thoughts and emotions that arise to them, appear to them as the play of dharmata. And so for these beings, then the Bardo of meditation, the Bardo of awareness is there. And so everything they experience phenomena, they can experience it and enjoy it as the play of dharmata. And that's why, for example, the physical body as the deity, the energy or power of speech, and the samadhi of the mind. And so that's also the bardo of this present life. And for these beings, it's also known as that bardo state of these realized beings, or the pure appearance, is also known as tingzin wasegi bardo, the bardo of the clear light samadhi, the samadhi of clear light or luminous clarity.
Yang ngarang zoga tina la tene ta te ta we tene rang yin je ni so ma do be sin je da jung ho la ta ka ri se cha go yo se na je ni je pa do so ma so je ba ni chine je ma tam je pa do ta te le se go ra tu so de je ni a ma nga le je ni ma she ko pa do ta se go so chine je ma tu je pa do se go ra ta te la ka ri nang de go yo se na ene ba kya ngom ju wang ge se ta nga mi ge le da 박샤 내공주 왕게서로 내공주 왕게 추는 안티비 이스 정데 마데발라 덴반진 마타발라 따도레 동할라 데버초니 잔도르 년종 라소비 차당당 사송 뺏음 라소바 큐비제 샤바 에니 다 제나 설주메바 에니 설나 닝보메바 오다 덴제 찍라 다 닝보도 종데 Any Mitzi youth somebody touching around so participate any Kani song the Hamo, Kani said the Hamo Machigi. Any Mitzi youth some not any time to me, Tonze Suchiava, Tanga to General Parchivig and Nanso de Tachanga, that there is Tanga to Chitang, Takoso Madapi, Tinato, Tatina, Kasi in a yin chograva. Drab me that a bia, don't chumbum, Chiasa, drab a young sugar, can't take them Chitangazo, Samata. Geneji pado nanga par chebige ta pena chunang ta chunang ge ne ta nga so pena ene ning churse chulpi o tela chunang se chunang ba
That's all. And so, but how is the same bardo of living experienced for beings who have not yet realized the primordial nature, who are still sort of caught up in their confusion, their confused projections? That is the ordinary sentient beings. Well, for the ordinary sentient beings, the bardo is the period of time from the moment we take birth from the womb, or rather the conception in the womb and birth, all the way through to the time of death. And that period of time is called the bardo, the intermediate state of this life. And for ordinary beings, we are sort of like driven by our habitual imprints, our sort of habit patterns. That means from the previous lives, karma, and the karmic habitual patterns and habitual ways of perceiving and engaging with phenomena, we're sort of driven to solidify our perceptions. Appearances solidified, reified is the word ateidzimba, reified, reifying appearances so that what is in fact not a source of happiness, we perceive as a source of happiness, what is actually suffering. And what is impermanent, we perceive it as permanent. What is unreal, we perceive as real. And so we grasp onto the realness of appearance phenomena. And in doing that, then we get caught up in the worldly pursuits, like the 8 worldly dharmas, as we call them, getting caught up in our entire lives, trying to win against enemies, trying to protect those that we perceive as our friends and our loved ones, trying to harm or get away from those that we perceive as antagonists or enemies, that duality. It's called like teaming, trying to overcome and conquer the enemies and trying to protect the friends and the loved ones. And we get caught up in all of this attachment and aversion, chagdang, and like all of these 8 worldly concerns. And then it's almost like all of our activities, endless work and endless activities that never end, things to do. And then all of that, it's like even when we finish something, there's no essence to it. Essenceless and endless worldly activities defines the human life for many of us. And as this sort of the brief momentary nature of this life, almost like in a moment it's gone and we don't know where all the time passed, but all that time flitting away in 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million different ways of getting caught up in the phenomena and the dramas of this life, all of that constitutes what we call the bardo of this life. And it's just a moment, just a brief moment, a brief split in time, this human life. And then we get caught up in all of this. And then that is what we call until the time of death, that period of time. That's the bardo as experienced through the confusion, through the confused perception.
아양 ngaran 속에 다 직된 되게 감라 양 다다 ngaran 속에 발도 양 yen다직 가리래서나 애니 닝초를 물람지 발도 생겨들이 철배 나니 닝초를 데다 다다 가서 하나 거기에 봐서다 철배 난거 줘봐라 닝초를
그래서
다 ngaran 속에 데라양 가리래서나 다 가서 닝무게 나와대 닝무게 얘네 다 가서 애니 나와대 애니 높게제니 양 알아주고 빼내다 세낭도 샤로라 세낭도 비기다 그 샤당으로지나 하랑 발도 챘던데 파지를 찍어요라 다다다 알아주고 빼다 제세 낭게 탭선으로서 나 희나 하는 찍어라고 지요라 강한터양 얘네 타마다 알아주고 빼나가서 얘네 다다 나와라 빠져서가 라빠져서 가게더니 다 가서가 빼다 제세 가서 얘네 나와 잡아 타봐 다 대답하게 탈았다 꾸이 때는 뭐 빙강나 다 꾸이기강나 때는 다르지도 고좀마 재매라고 지 결제니 되니 고도 빼 제스를 때는 하양 다 물랑게 되니 다 니모고 박혀도서 조 니모고 박혀도서 되니 다 물랑게 나라 샤르제니 양 물랑게 나라 레사 도도안가라서 자라 당과제 냐라 차과제 얘네 다때나 영아라서 그 주바 접되네 배드 제설에 되니 강해리 용 동아리 용 되네 배에서 가란서 배 삼살았더니 배 되니 다 물랑고 놀았더니 배 다당아서 동아리에서 용네 되니 배 뭐섬 다다더니 지 여바다 제발 가야 말에 배는 제설 맥을 맥혀 되네 배드 제설 깽에 혀 도서 제네 야 니도서 세도 다로는 다시도서 잡네 나 가래서 쌈되게도 삼상을 빼 할레비 찍고자는 땅에 파마도서 담게 때 가만 해서라 얘는 대서 담게 야 톡가서 빠지 땅 따지서 내와 지 가봉 강급지 롱때 나서 이나야 다디게 니 뒤야 세비 내가라 딱고 가성요 말어 물론비 값성이 물론 인상고요 말해 대스 예마 히라 되니게 에네 가르세 거다 야 남줄부터 속을 남줄부터 속이니 물론때서 던지 냠슬랑니 malam tamki malam de sheba to se chene tene malam de sotam ki yang nyam so le ni jinga zo malam wa sa de che sheba ne te na yin do na ta ene ta kwa ta ma da bi yulu la so kom do na ne na zo yang ki nyam so le nge te zu ngo la yang ga zo ene wa sa ji na wa sha sem ke mang ki bi ta nga na zo ko me se che ga le ma wa de tene ta malam na na ro de ko ra ta te lam de che hi to ba yena tene yang ga na zo ko pe ene 계산 전부자 라고도 너는 다때 담지 쪼보니 다다 때래 닝초를 물럼지 봐도 다때 깨내지 봐도 나도 소리다 봐도 이게 또 담지 참아 깨내지 봐도는 좋아래
So in the world of this phenomena, this present world, we have another sort of bardo within a bardo. And we call this the dream bardo, which we actually call as dreams are like super illusions, super delusion. So our whole experience of phenomena as sentient beings is experienced through confused projections, delusory appearances. And a dream is like almost like a delusion within a delusion, a super delusion. And we understand this because we know dreams to be illusory. We know they're not real. When we're in our waking state, we experience our delusion. And then there's like a delusion from within the delusion, a super delusion of the dream. So we go to sleep at night and it's like extra delusion. So that basically dreams represent the suspending of our present lives appearances of the waking state of this present day's life, and the night appearances arise in the form of the dream as we fall asleep. And then after we fall asleep, the dream phenomena arises, and that super illusion of the dream is still part of the bardo of this life. It's just that our gross level sensory phenomena temporarily subsides, and the more subtle level phenomena of our perceptions take governance in the dream state. And so if we understand the essence of this, we know how to recognize it. Actually, the dream state and the waking state are the same. And so in the dream state, when the gross level appearances fade and subside, and we are now experiencing the illusory dreamlike phenomena, the dream state, again, what this is our consciousness is sort of being withdrawn into what we call the alaya vijnana, the basic ground of our consciousness, which is sort of like going into a state of unconsciousness. It's kind of like we go to sleep in an unconscious state, and from within that state of subconsciousness or unconsciousness, which we call the basic all ground or the alaya, then again, the dream phenomena arises. And most of this is just the habitual appearances from this life. So lives like the movie of this life playing in the dream. And so the dream phenomena arises, and most of that, it comes from our own habitual patterns, our karmic habit patterns, which is why in the dreams we continue to make more karma by, fighting enemies, trying to conquer enemies with anger and aversion, or trying to gather and protect loved ones and friends with attachment and desire. And so it's just the continuation of our own delusory projections now in the dream state. And the dream state, it really is when we're totally immersed in the dream, we feel like we're the same as we do in our waking state. Because as long as we're not aware that we're dreaming, we experience it in present time. Like, for example, we experience suffering and hardship and pain, just like we're in our physical bodies. So depending on the dream appearance. So like, for example, like sometimes we have such a vivid nightmare, such a terrible bad dream that it's like we're really experiencing it. And sometimes we actually have visceral responses. We actually cry, or we yell out, we scream out in the dream. And sometimes even after we've woken from the dream, our bodies are still shaking because the dream just affected us so much. So we really do experience the dream as if it's real during the dream period. Or conversely, we might be having a very good dream. Like, for example, my parents have long since passed away, but sometimes in a dream, I meet them and we hang out together and we're partying like old times, having a big party, everybody happy, everybody, just jovial and enjoying, having this wonderful party. Then you wake up and it's like no trace of them, gone without a trace. Like all that whole scene is just dissolved. And so that's why the dream phenomena, if we do not realize it to be a dream, it feels and is experienced from us as real as the waking state. Now, for yogins and yoginis who practice dream yoga, who have some practice and apply their insight to the dream state, they're able to practice with the dream yoga, and then they're recognizing the dream to be a dream while they're dreaming. And that allows them to use the dream state as a forum for cultivating clear light, for liberating the dream into the clear light or luminous clarity awareness. And so they're able to train in pure view, pure appearances, refining appearances throughout the dream state. And if you think about the fact that we spend half of our human life asleep and dreaming, it's really a lot of good time that we can use. So it's a huge benefit and asset to us if we're able to learn how to practice the dream yoga and the dream state. We've just gained half our lives back, basically, more time for practice.
알았어. 다 가시 그냥 인가와라. 되니 다당가서 각과장아요래. 띵인데 대한 바도 돌아 다 빼듯이 쌈대양 되니 바도 돌아 야도세. 아니 되게 각과장아야 놓았어.
맞아.
응.
And there are some people who criticize the Nyingma tradition. And they say, oh, those Nyingmas, they even stuff the samadhi and meditation into the category of bardo, they say. There's some that try to debate the Nyingma. They say, you put the meditation in the category of the bardo, they say.
알았어. 다 아니 나쪽에 되니 나쪽 빼듯이 다다 찐이 바도 찍기나라. 그래와 댕에 답지 찍과래요 말와. 가시게 뭐라 다과 되니 가르사고로 나서로 답배도 계세를 다과 바시게 너나더니 애니 강다를 좀 찡거리로 봐 셔대바데 나서 투나는 야시입니다. 야 나서 때 여여레 땐데 여라 당아서 나서 처리도 고소 만들바디 찍고 되는도 야 나서 그런 거 나라 동안이한데 깔레냐한데 출발 누구 주르 야 고소 가시 능지가 곰 말람 뭐 살랍죠 다동 말람 람도 쳐지네 Tene chi nga so shingam tamchin rangwe ganza yang dowa. Ta te tamchi tene yo marisana Korang matong meba tapjere mato meba jere mido. Korang matong sa yo marisa ngala mebi chesaya mato labe kenda kaya yo mariten.
But you know, the thing is that we don't all experience the bardo of life the same way. We don't all have the same shared experience. And that's why, like, for some people who are able to recognize their primordially pure nature, everything in the bardo of life is not ordinary. It's all the display. All appearances are deity, form, and wisdom. All the sounds are mantra, and all thoughts and arisings of the mind are recognized as Rigpa primordial awareness. And that is the singular and only experience of the great beings who perceive this present life always in its pure nature. And so for them, all form, all sounds, and all awareness is perceived as the pure mandala of the primordial purity. And so they don't have even a tiny speck of impure appearance for these great beings. And then for those who are still lost in the sort of reifying confusion of their confused state, they don't see that. They don't experience this life's phenomena in the same way. They experience suffering and hardship, and they see this as like a very difficult state. And then there are some who are practicing, who are able to be in that clear light nature, who are able to take as the path the dream yoga and the dream practices, who are able to recognize this to be a dream, who are able to abide in the clear light nature, and who, because of their realization, are able to guide and lead others to liberation and to the Pure Land. There are those who are abiding in the same state of this present life, but they're experiencing it very differently. And so my response then to those who seek to challenge or debate this view is that maybe it doesn't exist for you, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist just because you can't see it. And so for those who are still steeped in their delusory appearances, they do not recognize the pure appearance as it is, then for them it may not be real. But that doesn't mean that it's not real. It doesn't mean it's not there just because they can't see it.
Wala ta te tabuda samlo yago tana ta nga so nyamne jinga soge. Nga so kanza jiki tengna bena ngarang jiki tengna samlo tanga. Bete ta jik thomele jik ngarang soge ya jik samlo tang jirewa. Eni 장협 샘비제 솔와제 답 곰다고 그 수지 미도에 네 디가 값서 되네 나란 소페나 띵인생 하는 도와 디 값서 때 프리베 나와야 말에 말라미야 말에 고디 값서 가서 버티서 띵인생 다 가서 답이 나와지 야 때스레 요라제 랩 콩조지 랑 되네 야 빼도 배대 거서 jor제네 빼도 해당 나지를 하도 내코 쌤 섭도 찌레 상회지 차로 묻어야 뭐다 다 띠값었더니 다 가르쳐서 이니 가서 더니 녀모 되네 가서 빼데 이니 되게 다 빼데 계속 쓰비기 때문에 양코도 나는 깨지기를 막 랩도다 아 때는 이게 지발에 되네 지금 가는 속다 죄받다 소이나 다지 세몬다고 지나다 가서 지 이니 혼론다고 있나 대체거라 근데 다지 가르쳐 니 가서 거기 가르쳐 이니 라민 남주라고 다 되네라고 제백값이야 삼삼라 때서 가는 속 애니 곰라고다 되지 가서 제 해봐다 삼삼라지 되지 용어로 되지 손잡에는 미치로를 따고 말해 가서 소소 찍은 원래 차이하고 있나 다다다 가서 대 탐지 삼아 전이 되더래 참아 전이 되더래 이내야 쇼 치와대 푸능되게 왕도 journey 되네 답이 나와대 쇼 김경차 얘네 너네 답이 나와대 마다 비트네 단생 왕도 쇼르체네 되네 다 알아서 참아 되게 되네 찍nga 좀 그러었어요. 되네 차도요라. 이나야 뒤나나 야고 되는 뒤노라 처음 뭐지 야 제대지 해버지래. 대때 바도 지내지 바도 나나 바도 위에 돼서 담게 레레를 삼았다나. 되네 은이 되네 가서 태바다 지바. 강사 찍기 때문에 지나요. 태바다 지바래만 또 때문에 태바지 짜네 말이야.
And so if we just only look, for example, at one, just thinking about it from like the perspective of one person, like just from our own perspective, not looking at other people, not looking outside, just taking it, bringing it back to relate to our own personal experience, right? So you know how it is, like you start your practice and you give rise to bodhicitta, right? We have certain period of time when we're practicing and we cultivate the bodhicitta, we give rise to the pure motivation, we supplicate and pray and we meditate, right? We have time for that. Well, during that period of time, you call that the bardo of meditation. Because in that moment, you're not caught up in the delusory appearance phenomena. In that moment, you're not dreaming, so you're not in the dream bardo. And you have that glimpse into the pure view, into the pure appearance. And during that period of time, when you're really present in your practice and meditation, then you're in the bardo of the samadhi, the meditation. And then something happens, some drama, and then you become pissed off and angry and filled with ego and pride. And sometimes you get so angry, you almost feel like, I could just kill that sucker. You feel that rage rising up. And that brings you back to the bardo of the confused state of mind, the kleshas, the emotional poisons. And so sentient beings, it's like our experiences change throughout a day and throughout the life. We go through periods of time where we're very much caught up and enraptured in the sort of state of impure perception. And then we go through periods where we're brought back to the true nature. And so for Dharma practitioners, especially like, you know, for example, in Wundro, you're doing your Wundro, you have your different phases of the day and night. And as you're going to bed in the night, you know, you do your Guru Yoga practice and visualization. And sometimes it really takes, you know, sometimes it doesn't always take, but sometimes it takes. Sometimes you really feel it. And in that moment, you're in the bardo of meditation. Then there's really like genuine being in touch with that state of pure perception, pure appearance. And then other times, not always, but sometimes when you practice and you're in that state. And so even you don't have to look outside. In a single individual, we can see the different phases or the different periods of experience and perception that show this kind of gradation of phenomena and experiences in this life, in this world. And so now for most of us, like we have sort of proportionally speaking, more proportionally, like the higher proportion of our energy and our perception is caught up in the delusion, the delusory perception, impure appearance, and then a smaller percentage or proportion of perception is the pure view, pure perception. Because we sort of fall prey to our ego, our grasping at self, and then it kind of gets colored by the self-grasping. But even within that, even within this sort of like overarching self-grasping, confused appearance phenomena, we have these little moments, these little glimpses, little small subtle moments where we're in that pure presence, where we're in that pure perception. So if you each think like each of us, each of ourselves, just like in a single being, a single person's experience, then you can see how there are different phases and different bardos of experience within this very life.
Hola, Sota. Jenny Pardo, Kitang Logi here, Sarjeni. Ona that Jenny Pardo Nanga to Tablam Carayore. Nyamle Carachegore. Some of Caretangores. That there is that. Menagalam the Chavasing. Not Jenny Pardo, Pardo Yores, Lamiatus, Trananco, Pardo Yore, Shannon Sawajores, Tomatos, Tagrajing, Pardo and Rodinga Carachegre, Shenjet so good song, the Nipper, the Chester Russia Lango, the Tamar Tringo down the net, Tanking Clamango, and what you have Lang Yagora.
Yes.
And then Magita Pardola, Tinta, Yona, Palo Tap Caragores, T. Nang Tap Carchi, the Tata Jenny Pardo Capsera. Jenny Pardo Capseta Nasola Ramon. Jukitulera. Any ta yenda to some dribu capso, when Maso Yamato Rawan Chembora Calacapore. Teta Jenny Pardo, the Tenic Chembo in Bare. Teta Jenny Pardona, the Takarche Gores and the Tape the page sondoa. Penata the Danga Yams and Lambalas. 제를 때니 특사 상은 좀 왔다 봐. 다 특자 생겼더라. 이니 가르쳐 거래. 지하들 양 먼저 계단 민라버들 가시도. 나 현재는 뭐지 소나 다다디. 다 데데 가르쳐 거래. 난 가서 봐봐는 이나 쿠다세레 사게 근데 자 양들에게 너는 사들이지 마더니 로봇들이 붙이더니 곧 창조하게 도와.
Yes.
별을 송도 강한테 딱고 당고니 빼 맞게 거는 답게 효 땅네 때라 드라그 너바 용사래다 말에 가래도서 쌈번다 도면도 때네 되네 지마고 태섬에 반로죠 다양 자기나도 때려면 다 당고니 빼 탑자질이야 되네 팔고서 온데 거서 다 보고도 솔직히 가라는 때하 영거나 되네 지 연다그 드라마 용사 파다 쳤다야 다음도 양 레레 때네 파포는 마포 때리스 때기 도와 드레스 거 탑들이면 Te na yi mayin pa tata rani ga su no la tene tapje ya po tang ni ma pa tene ngani ro de ka su te so me ba se ta pe na tu sa sang ju pa ta bu ji tene che go re so sa te
That's very much it. And so that pretty much covers like the overview of the bardo of this life and kind of like how we can understand what that means. But now, obviously, the next question is like, well, what do we do? How do we make use of it? What is the skillful means? What is the practice? How should we be thinking and kind of preparing ourselves to make best use of what is the practice specifically designed for this bardo of human life, of the bardo of this present life? And so according to the tradition of the Mengak, the oral instructions, then we do have a path. We have to know how to prepare. In other words, the bardo of the present life is so important because if we wait until we're reaching the next bardo, the bardo of the dying state, it's much more difficult to have any sense of control over that experience. Once we've kind of our lives have come to the completion, then there's less control over how we can navigate ourselves. That's why now is the time to do everything we can to prepare so that we're ready for the next phase of the next bardo. Because like everybody's so scared of, the bardo of dying. It's almost like everybody's like, oh no, the bardo, and they're, getting all their, they're doing all their practices and getting all their accoutrements and spinning the prayer wheels and just trying so hard to kind of prepare. It's like, oh, so scary. What am I going to do when I'm in the bardo? But we have that power, we have the control now where we can prepare as best we can using this life, this bardo of this present life, to really make sure that we're prepared. And the example, it says like how we make use of this bardo of life is, generally speaking, train according to the heart instructions, just like how a swallow prepares its nest, enters its nest, like a swallow entering its nest. The swallow bird, we understand them as like very, very resourceful and prepared. Like before they even start building the nest to lay their eggs, they make sure they scan the whole surroundings and they make sure that they pick a space that is safe from any danger. Like they look around, they don't just like build their nest willy-nilly and then just like hope for the best. In other words, live by default. They take a real preparation, and they look at the site, they make sure that there won't be any danger, they build their nest there, and then they can kind of leave their little baby birds in there to go out and get food and bring it back, because they know that they've secured their nest in a place that is safe and without any danger, because they took the time to kind of like scan the environment, pick the right location, build the right nest and everything. And so that is the example. According to Khyentse Rinpoche, the tradition, as I learned it, that's the analogy. Is like when we are using this present life to prepare for the next bardo, that we really are like preparing, so that when the time comes to enter that nest, we've made sure that it's prepared and it's safe, and we have everything equipped to handle the next phase.
다 대라 가서 냠슬래 당고 돈에 드네 다 바드 쇼초고 바드 자색 나는 다 간데 송어서나 제마달라 제니 바도 셔비 셀라롬에 담저 물은도 라브룩나라 나와 유점세 신도 까바 토피 든더라 런케레네 똥로 만참바 전주 삼에 유ቆ르 닝볼롱 투섬 공섬 롱레 삼에추 제도 니덴 드비 낸데라 농요 든로 따바 마녀르바 다다니도 매바 잡고이 뭐다 쳐와 곰비 짜지고 롱메 로나 동위 뒤집어서.
That's what I'm So the root text for the practice of from the root text of the Bardo of the 6 Bardos, the root text on the Dharma teaching, it says Kima during this time that we are in the arising of the intermediate state of birth and living. There is no leisure in this life, in this human existence with its opportunities and endowments so difficult to obtain. The perception of someone swallowed up in darkness is over in a short time. During this time, while you've attained something so difficult to find, rather than returning to the island of jewels empty-handed, give rise to your mind with profound diligence and make meaningful use of this life through the threefold process of listening to teachings, contemplating their meaning, and meditating on the profound teachings based on studying and reasoning. Focus in the key point. Integrate the 2 stages of development and completion while there is still time. So without laying around like an animal, strive right here and now with intense effort to arouse yourself with the goad, with the sort of drive of meditating on impermanence and death, and utilize this unique opportunity to narrow the focus of your mind, for there is no time to waste.
원라서. 다 간다야 자당가란 쪽에 나주다 원로 여러 원로 빼나 로도 남바 이게서 되니 약보제는 로경제 얘네 하고도 되게 나오니다 개치휴직 얘네 뭐다 받으려 돼요.
Yes.
뭐다 보면 돼.
Yes. So anyway, within the Ngundro, we have the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. So really study these 4 thoughts, and especially the most important among these 4 thoughts is the contemplation on impermanence.
뭐였다? 뭐다 빠게 되네 타당가란 쪽에 다 빼나 애니 뭐다 빠당 애니 타당가란 쪽에 직 애니 거위란 게 힘봄에 받티 되네 가란 쪽에 줄라 님종으로 제바이나 님종 약고시 제바이나 되네 가란 게 투성 곰섬 제도라서 받아서 덤질라 랑힌 한게 욕문으로 배 탑이어 말했어.
And if we really have gained a deep internalizing and understanding of impermanence, and also the nature of samsara as the nature of suffering, that samsara has no essence, the essenceless nature of samsara, we give rise to what happens is genuine renunciation mind will awaken within us, and we have good renunciation for worldly life and samsara, then naturally, without having to be pushed, we will naturally want to practice, want to listen, contemplate, and meditate, and do the deity development stage and completion stage practice. It's like we'll be sort of like automatically entering into those practices.
아, 나라서 그 직출로 그 삼바지 가서 여바이나야. 되네 될라다 가서 마 애네 레로다 나밍. 되네 가서 드롭 투고입니다. 다 직가서 나기 매운 마음 거치 야고 이제 드고인다. 나라는 내가 참아야. 되네 gem포도서 참아 쳐라. 되네 다 빼도 저서 애네 드레지레도 값서 되게 취야고 이제 제긴 삼 거요. 망치상으로 데려가는 다 대등 알아서 되네 빼도 저서 레가요. 애네 대다 간세 그렇고 되니 르보야 그 양나 때때 기서 내전을 대다 지었고 연애면 강시 대마 대마체라 대마체 이니 치와성이데 나즈 로다 뜻으로 찍텐데 에 나서를 믿어와 빼나 거서 가서 남치 참여래도 되니 치고도 가나지도 라만 바래도 마도 빼나 나서를 드레이치 시그 말했어요 나서를 댕이 가야입니다 드레이 시그 말이 드레이 거다 가르스는 미 망보지 다다라는데 거서 내매 너매 가야매살 지금 가서 양나 쟁 양나 던지 양나 가르치는 톱적 오지 싫어가 망보다 그래서 좀 제가 섬들어요 다다 시그 말했어 양나 나 로충형이 나다 시그 말 로게보르지 대주 다 타마도 시전데 알아서 싸면 가시 다다랑도 거저 빼래 로 중종이나요 팬도 겁니다 로 중종돼서 제마 타도 해동에 아 얘가 이거 내 나사면 해동에 망보지도 와 대대서 가서 삼노 야고지 땅나 되네다 되라 메타바 생인디 가서 쭝주 거는 연나 매나 그랬더니 가서 다 빼는 된다고 그래 어 따라오지기나 되네 다시 안 들어보지
맞아. So most of us have the impetus to practice Dharma in our minds. We think, oh yeah, I've got to practice. I'm going to practice. But because of our laziness and our distractions, we kind of put it off. We procrastinate and we say like, well, right now I can't practice. I have these things I have to take care of. But in the future, later, I'm definitely going to set things up so that I have the freedom to practice. And so we think in our minds, like we have everything fully planned out, like, well, I'm going to work, I'm going to save money. And then once I can take my, retirement, my savings, then I'll be able to just focus entirely on practice. And, everything in our perfect ideal world is set up so that we finish all of our work. We're totally have all the resources we need. And then next thing, all we do is we just practice leisurely. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we lose our job, or by the time we finally have free time, our bodies are so decrepit that we really aren't very fit for practice. When the situation changes, then what do we do? So always kind of thinking, yeah, later, it doesn't really serve us because we really don't know. And that's really how it is. Like a lot of times we think that we're going to be here on this plane for so long, many, many years we think we have. But if you really, really are honest with yourselves, you can see that like we really have no clue how long we have left in this life because the time of death is uncertain. And that's really true, isn't it? Like none of us can say definitively with 100% confidence, like, I know for a fact I'm not going to die today. I know for a fact that by tonight I won't be dead. None of us can really confidently say that because death by its nature, that is elusive, it's unknown, it's uncertain. So we really don't know when death will come, and when death comes, that's the point at which we won't have control the way we have now to be able to kind of ordain our lives in such a way as to practice and to focus on practice. And so death is uncertain. And we don't even know how we will die. People, the situation is like uncertain. It's undetermined for us. We don't know. Maybe we die from some sudden accident, maybe from some affliction. Maybe, we could die right now. We don't know. Death is something that we have no control over. And if you're young and you think, oh, I'm young, I have plenty of time, well, I should remind you that death doesn't discriminate between young and old. And we see many cases in which, young children, even babies just after birth, they don't live long. So youth is no guarantee of death being warded away. There are cases where people in a very young age die, after years of a sickness. And so you don't know. Impermanence, that's the point. Impermanence is the best motivator for diligence. Because it's kind of like if you want the horse to go and you have a whip and you whip the horse, the impermanence meditation, reflection on impermanence is like the whip that gets the horse of your diligence to get moving.
알았어. 되니요. 망보지 가서 드셔도 나라 따따 소치가 믿었어. 에탈 이가래 비즈레. 내가 참아 요구는 어체라고 말해. 되니 나를 링게요. 나를 되니 뒤서 싸바님 까르마직 메스. 가다가도. 너네 상로 야고 땅은 내가들 추스 예를 락과 내게미도아. 추스 나나 추스 예를 해도. 니마 제가 추스 니 감이오라. 다 되게 나나 빼는 데니 다동 되죠라. 빼는 데니 가란 저거 되게 삼라. 되니 가서 빼도 기스니 니 구야 그냥 쓰죠라. 다 대라양 되니 다 빼도 기스 이니 추스 이니 제도 야바이나 다른 것도 쓰면 아무도. 몰라서 다 디파트나 집이다야. 그네 제모 제야. 근데 강조 먼저 기억하면 디트서 되니 연다 파야라 추츠 니그 잡이 용조다 디노 파 마당지니 디나니 추츠 니 지고 지츠르 텐데 데 제바이나 나도 고급때 또 매주 산드레메다 디나니 베드타 쇼가이난다 곤다이난다 쇼가 추츠지 곤다 추츠지라고 지츠르 소마이나 디네 양아란 소고 베드 캐서에니 도스야 싸야바이나야 맞을 추츠르 생각을 싸니 매바 드리지라 말아 대마체 개완 로교를 도교르지 개와 사교르 사교르 니교르 딕반 로교르 도교르스레 맞아 사히 람란 로흔 로히 가디 땅해 레가 뭐네 제 담승이잖아 담승 계제 열어 몸잡 초그래 소거드네 세 레게 추생에 또 샘을 알아야 되거라 될 때니까 냠네 제 마토 빠져야 대야래요 말이야
뭐지? So, you know how people, they like to make lots of excuses. Like they like to say, oh, I don't have any time. I'm so busy. I have so much work to do, work this, work that. I have so much to do. Or maybe like, oh, I have to work because I need to support myself. I need to make a salary. And, I don't have any time. I have so many responsibilities. They like to say, I have so many things I am responsible, people I'm responsible for. So I have to work. So I don't really have time for practice because, in fact, I don't even have 1 minute, people say that. And they make excuses. Because if you really think about it, I mean, let's be real. How many hours a day are you really working? 8 hours, maybe 8-hour workday, or, some people 5, 6, 8 hours. Let's just say the typical workday is like 8 hours. So, okay, I'll give you that 8 hours. You're busy, you're working, but there are 24 hours in a day. And I know some of those times you're going to be sleeping. So 8 hours you're sleeping. But even if you sleep a full 8-hour night, and even if you work a full 8-hour day, that doesn't fill up the full 24 hours. That's only 16 hours. You still have a good chunk of time in there that you can devote to virtue. But what do? When we have those in-betweens, those break times where we're not busy, where we're not sleeping, what do? We watch TV, we flip the channels, or maybe we play video games, or we do things, just whatever, frit away the time. So don't tell me you have no time, because actually in a 24-hour day, I think we can all afford to devote, let's just say 2 hours, even just 2 hours. We have a chance, an opportunity to devote to practice. Even just 2 hours, that's something, isn't it? 1 hour maybe in the morning time, 1 hour in the evening time. That's something. And so, for example, when we engage in that, like, nobody can say that they truly don't have a single free moment for practice. And also, virtue is something that we don't need to set aside a specific time and place and then say, now I'm going to do virtue. Virtue is something that we always can be accruing as we go about our lives and as we go about our day. There's a saying that virtue is accomplished, on the go and sort of on the way of doing something else. And the same with non-virtue. Non-virtue, negative karma, we can accrue sort of on the way and on the go as we go about our day. So we have all these opportunities to either be furthering and promoting our virtuous actions and our virtuous karma, or increasing our negative karma, whether we're on the go, on our way somewhere, driving in the car, whatever we're doing, we have an opportunity to continue to practice virtue. And it's a matter of using these moments, grabbing these moments, taking hold of them, and directing ourselves to a virtuous end. And that is because Dharma is primarily dependent upon the mind. And so these are opportunities that we can use for practice.
알았다. 빼나 되는 말한 속에 예휴 쳐받았어. 되네요. 거라는 게 갈람 되네. 다 잠불래는 거라서 참지 야도와. 대대 대다가 zaman yakıp paçırmam nan ko chiba yeşi yendamin sami tele rohdo kareres za pembada teni nimas ngade chujiyaku hobi yagido yenda minen yeşi nan yabi ko거 뒤에 가서 냠내나 참아 배주다나 가세 뒤서 야고도 했어.
The Christian sort of the Christian tradition in the West has really made a tremendous impact on the entire way of the world because in the country because it's from the original Christian tradition that you set aside a day of rest, the weekend, Saturday and specifically Sunday, that is set aside for penance or for practice, for Dharma, really, for setting aside the work to do spiritual practice. And so if you think about it, the Christians have given us a great opportunity. We have our weekends that we can devote to practice Dharma.
거기서 주제 뭐는 거가 예수 그때는 가서다 산다베서 가서 때는 가서가 가서 곰바도 예수가 하는 냠려라 강도 열라 거기서 잡 뱀바 니마도서 미세게 거기 초르치 담지 때는 빠트 가지게 거 강사래 파킹 마라바도 개고 상업하나 랩사래 거기서 말은 가서 남과돼서 딱적 참사래 가가 가드도 땅네들 거기 욕사대 거기 상하는 로고에 말해 맞지 상하는 게 고잡이래.
No, actually, they should be praised because they really take their practice day seriously. Like the idea of like going to temple or church. So like the Westerners who practice the Judeo-Christian religions, they go, you see them all Saturday comes, they're off to temple. Sunday comes, they're off to church. And the whole parking lot's filled. Even the old, grandmas and grandpas, they, hobbling over to do their Sunday church day. They get dressed up, they go, they make a concerted effort. Every parking lot of the church is filled up with people going to do their Sunday prayers. And they're, coming together with their religion and their faith. But what happens with us Buddhists and all those Christians filling the parking lots so the streets are clear? And we're going out having a good time, having fun, taking our cars, but the Dharma center's doors closed, nobody there, no church going on Sundays for the Dharma practitioners. So that's something to note.
Oh yeah, 다 가르쳐 그렇고 데려도 와서 답변은 고급도 코즈가 고급을 내야도 코즈 고급 장고를 레기 나는 고급을 내기도 맞을 거 말아 다 맞을 난 이야기 저러 상지게 난 가지고 빼나다 집 종아니 그 가서 이니 가르쳐 이니 냐 뜻이 다 돼서라 이니 용 나와 요 말에 때때는 다 카미도야 봐 나 예쇼 그때 제가고 있거든 나한테 코토로 고가비어래 이내 용거 듣지면 낭바이나 휴지 조금 말다 하세 그냥 이제 뭐니 고잡 거래서 이나 휴지세 때 까다입니다 까도 그래 가서 가르치도 좀
And if you think about it, like the Judeo-Christian traditions have taken such root and they really like the whole country honors and obeys it. Like even the way that the country is set up is like you have a specific day that is considered the holiday or the day off, like the weekends. And that is set aside for you to do your spiritual practice. And the Christians and the Judeo-Christian traditions, they really take advantage of that. They go to their temples, they go to their churches, and they have the permission and the authorization of the country. But we Buddhists, yeah, we have our special holy days, right? Like the 10th day, the 15th day, the 25th day, full moon day, the day of like all these special days that we recognize are very important days for engaging in spiritual practice and making prayers and doing ceremonies. But the country doesn't acknowledge that we have these special days. So the country doesn't give us every full moon day off, every Guru Rinpoche day off, all this for us to practice, right? But they do honor the Judeo-Christian traditional idea of a day of practice, and that happens to fall on Saturdays and Sundays. And so why not just take advantage of what is already given? So even though, okay, I can understand it's a fair excuse that, your country doesn't give you the day off every, Buddhist holiday. So I can understand that. But what is your excuse for not at least utilizing the days off that you do get by permission of the country to do your practice on Saturday and Sunday? Because certainly the country government doesn't say to you, oh, everybody can have this day off to do their spiritual practice, except for the Buddhists. Buddhists, you cannot do any prayers on these days. You're prohibited. You're forbidden. They don't do that. They don't care. They don't try to stop us. So even though they don't give us our own special holidays, at least they don't get in our way. and don't try to prohibit us from practicing. So we really don't have any good excuse for why our temples and our practice rooms remain closed on these days off like Saturdays and Sundays.
Hola, società. 다 강도야 다 ngaran 속에 되니 바도 그 냠내 생에 때 원래 빼 망고 해요라. 치카고 바도를 해요래. 얘네 다 어서지 바도네 해요래. 다 제네지 바도네 때 망고지 해요래 때. 얘네 대 탐지라 약고지 톱도 마톱대. 다다 제네지 바도들 어디 라래요래. ngazola 빼샤드다 요라. 이나야 다다 ngaran 속에 은에게 더 다즈 ngaran 속에 빼내다 이니 치카이나연라 시차도이나 대 값서 다지 ngaran 속에 빼다 이니 고베 값대라 되니 냠설레 토야게 탑이 가르 공원에서는 다다 찐이 봐도지 값을 네 값을 다 빼다 께서 ngaran 속에 다다 빼다 깨름 고매이나야래 조람 고매이나야래 학벌도 되니 가서 얘네 조랑 benang pena melamtang pardotang teni kilula so patso kom chi gomede 도저히 되게 값을 거죠 딱 은행에 되니 바이셔당 아니라 다 걸어 대 맞에 되니 딱 나랑 쪽 빼는 쪽같이 못도 속 검제 되니 쟁나랑 쪽 빼는 다 치가 어슬 다 빼는 거와 빼는 다 가서 치기 다 지가 어슬 겁니다 다다 곰비 톱지 얘네 대도 그 값을 되니 다 가서 빼듯해서 어슬 첨부터서 다 위에 어슬도 저 혈용도 값 되니 다다 곰비 틀 때는 되니 디 값을 되니 대서들은 뭐 샤고요라 다다 그 쌈된 찌직 더지 곰토바데 디 값을 되니 다 샤솜스데 대자고 샤고래 대다고 혈용도 값을 되니 깨지 다다라는 게 냠는지 토니 제대바데 도저히 되니 디 샤고도 값을 뭐시네 마방도 번죽 받다버 되니 돌도 그래 생인데 양 다다라리도 와
맞아.
디 맞지 얘네 양 가서는 어서지 나와 다 빼는 게서 되는 게 어서지 바로 여러 양 돼서 다다다 빼는 이난거 냠내려도 왔다
맞아.
른로 그랬더니 낭차도 샤오
맞아.
다다랑 그랬더니 가서다 특교 더글 생겨서 빼나 그니 까다기 냠내 생인데 위를 더 줘야 그 제대로 른로비 냠내 더글 돼서 아니 유토스 줘야 그 그래서 얘네 다다 이난 거 도저히 셔오게 다다 가서 더 그렇게 나왔는데 셔도 대가랑 그래 대랑 다다 가서 대랑 뭐 시바지 제네 대진 리토기 하나 도저히 뭐 미시 미시 바로 돼 미시 셔버 미시 그래고 셔그러 왔다 셔도 값서 대랑 뭐 시소나 대대드는 가랑 속에 다다 더지 레메도 다다 이나 가서 줄이 셔라 되게 찡 근데 뭐고 바뀌어도 얘기 돼서 망보지 그때 여발서나 하 고았담지 저렇다고 말. 대대 가족이 르게 지 드비 청와담지 식. 얘네 가족 빼는 얘네 팸비에 그때는 제 가랑 속 대 여러 되네 다 똑소담지 다 녀모도 똑소담지 각리 여배 값서 또 트바다 냠도 상게 두고요. 이 값을 빼는 되네 계속 올랐다 띠 멘션이 되네 지 가서 레하고 휴대지 여래야 저랑 됐다고 통오데 대값을 저랑 내리지 됐다고 지금서 빼래도 더는 이나양 돼서 다다라는 장바 매나 아니 빼도 저서래 가돌려도 깔아가고 휴래샤 삼사나 다다 냠내서 싸니 마냥 받아서라 다다게 돼서 덤지 깨지기를 혈바도 조바 되냐므로도 빼는 가 저거 다 빼도 저서 노지에서 바로 견유된다고 샤고 망고 혈도 해서 덤지 나도 다다 나도 이런 거 어설트서도 다다 냠내 싸니 매제도라 고 샬롱도 들어오면도 없고 나도 다다라는데 깨지기 곰용을 말아 들려 말아 그런 깨지기를 거도 조찬으로 근데 맨초트 솔라다 다다기 값을 가세지 애니 냠내 여바 될 때니 때 도저히 때나기 샬롱이래 근데 다다 니마 제일 때니 지금 가서 까르마 가르세 거로 까르마 껴라 때니 지금 가서 다 냠내 젠데 대 통행다고 지그여나 대도 가르세는 쌈땡이 샤 솜세 샤부 숨짓 말을 까마 숨짓 뭐 까마 숨짓 담아라고 빼는 주저 숨짓 담아라고 Tinjiki ta call ya develop tini tinero hora. Tini shalom yore. Cholong yore. Lakbardo such a number so. Tini tata ngazu to something yamso lang. Or set to something more she. Rang tap at the rangnigi she yamba. Touching also heba tamjiki. Sensa sembachi majone. Tedita conato a ticket coco. Vada said the cola so what something. Shaya get to so yore. Te sonsa. Edit torso where. Tete. Hata tene to so cause of petches. Kill major to so. It pages and also. Yore yore. Cockab yorete. Cockab yorete. Tapit tata lagna. 마음을 고급됐더니 하나님들이 고 잡한다고 지과래. 열에서나 열에라고 봐. 심지어 탐지 대행이 보지지 인이 zon대. 되게 되는 거랑 저거다. 람때 땐데 열에. 이나야 열에 팽말 민고 마신게지. 람나 톡나 세로다. 랑가 아마 호만이 락서주지. 고 마시니 나랑 롱바 똥바 똥정 깨는도 멜 레와지 자고 하나. 랑가 아마한테 터바토나. 띵아랑 아마 임바. 뭐 시그마래. 아마이 방 오마시다 아마게 로까지 두 말에 되네 되네 거 답이다 거 배도야 말에 에 저기 형한테는 마오가 도는 걸 듣지로 응 가로도는 용화 지선 랍는데
So in any case, the Bardo continue, as we go on, we'll talk about the different Bardos and to practice the Bardos. So like the practice of the Bardo of this present life, and then you have the Bardo of the Bardo of the dying process, the Bardo of the clear light luminosity, the Bardo of the dream, the Bardo of meditation. Well, of all the Bardos, and especially the Bardos after death, the most important Bardo for us to really focus on is this one, this present life, the Bardo from the period of our birth throughout this life. And the reason why is because whether or not we are able to recognize what we need to recognize as we traverse through the other Bardos is going to hinge on the efforts and energies that we've put into practicing in this life, the Bardo of this life. And so, for example, like if we have good practice and we have a good understanding, then when the time of our death comes and we are faced with the primordial being arising before us, then we will have some basis to recognize it. And so that's why it always comes down to that you can learn about all the Bardos, but the most important Bardo right now for us is to use this time that we have the freedoms to practice in this life so that we can gain some familiarity and some conversance with what we are going to meet with in a more intense way when we pass from this life. And so whatever we can do, the degree to which we dedicate the Bardo of this life to practice, doing development stage, completion stage, however much time we devote to it, when we engage in this practice, then like and dream yoga, working with the dream yoga practices, or training with what we call the illusory body practices. The point is that using this life for practice. Not only that, but like meditating on the Dzogpa Chenpo Great Perfection practices, so that when the time comes where we are passing from this life and then the clear light shines forth, the unimpeded luminous clarity shines forth, that by the power of our meditation, because we have gained some glimpses and familiarity through our practice, then when the clear light shines forth at the time of death, when the radiance self-arises from the primordial ground of our true natures, that ground of pure being, when that clear light from the ground of pure being arises, then because we've meditated and gained some kind of familiarity with it at our lifetime, then that clear light, that basic pure being will be arising, like continuum of that time will last longer. The length of time that we are able to abide in the arising of the pure nature, the pure being, Dharmata, will depend upon how much we have familiarized ourselves and practiced, cultivated during our lives. So like for practitioners who have some conversance with this, then 3 days, but those 3 days are called, they're not days in the sense of the calendar that we understand it, but the 3 meditation days. And so we'll have a period of time where we will have the arising of that pure being, the primordial nature. And then it will be like a child recognizing its mother and jumping into its mother's lap and reuniting the child awareness, which is the pure awareness that we became familiarized with when we were practicing during this life. Well, when the mother primordial awareness of the basic nature shines forth at the time of death, the child awareness recognizing its mother goes to its mother, is reunited. That's liberation. And so that's why right now depends on right now how much we practice, how much we gain familiarity with the clear light nature, the pure vision of our primordial nature. Because the pure being arises as the dynamic radiance or the appearance of the basic ground. And that is basically when we do practice of Trekche and Togel. So Trekche, the cutting through practice, is practicing directly on the basic pure ground of being itself. And Togel is the practicing with the spontaneous appearances, the spontaneous display in the presence. And that's practicing from the display or the visions that arise from this basic ground. So that's the only difference, Trekche and Togel. So when we practice this, and we have some familiarity through Trekche practice with the primordially pure basic ground of our awareness, then at the time of death, it will be simply recognizing that which we already have some familiarity with, and we'll be able to abide longer in that state of samadhi and recognition and be liberated. And similarly, if we've become familiar with the visions that during the Togel practices, the spontaneous presence, well, at the time of the Bardo, everyone, there's no way to avoid it. It will arise, these visions, the tigles, the light rays, the lights, the spheres, all of these will arise. But whether we recognize them and how long that they appear to us will depend upon how much we have stabilized our practice in this life to be able to gain conversance into them. So for example, like when we have practiced in this life, then we have a sort of kinship, a recognition, a familiarity with that awareness, that pure being nature. And so it will arise. It's not a question of if. Of course, at the time of death to all beings, it arises, but whether it's seen, whether it's recognized, that depends on the degree to which we practice. And so now is the time really to make use of that practice. And that's why in the Bardo of being in this life is so important. And so, for example, when we are in this present life, we are doing the practice, but we're not getting as intense of an unmediated direct experience as we do when we die. Why? Because in this life, we're practicing, but we're still somewhat encumbered by this body, this corporeal body of flesh and blood, which we say is kind of like a sheath. That's kind of like, we're kind of like shackled to the physical phenomena. And because we are shackled to the physical phenomena, we have the skandha of form, we are still going to be somewhat blocked or limited from that unmediated direct experience. But when we die, we are released from the encumberments of the physical body of flesh and blood. And similarly, all of the concepts, conceptual ideation, all the emotions and thoughts are subsided, are suspended. And so we have a much better chance of direct experience of that unmediated direct experience of pure being and the visions that arise from that state of pure being, the appearances, the radiance of pure being, because we're no longer encumbered by our bodies of flesh and blood. But in this life, the degree to which we are able to abide in our meditation, in our practice, in that primordial nature, the longer we set aside to do that, the more chance we have of a longer period of time at the Bardo of death to be able to encounter and recognize pure being as it arises to us. And so it'll be much easier for us. And it's almost like we say, like, just meeting with it, instantly we are liberated, we are free, because we already have been setting the stage, preparing ourselves in this life. And so that's why it's so important. That's why it really depends so much on the degree to which we've gained practice and familiarity, practice. And so for somebody that hasn't any practice, hasn't done any practice, still when they pass away from this life, they still have the same phenomena arising. The nature, the primordial nature still arises to them. It arises like such a swift glimpse, like moment, and then gone because they don't recognize it. And so like for somebody who has set aside practice, like let's just say every day you do 10 minutes of, practice where for those 10 minutes you're working on, practicing with recognizing the pure being nature. And then at death, then that awareness that pure basic nature will arise unmediated to you. For every 10 minutes, it's like one day, one practice day. So maybe that's like 30 minutes. So like 30-minute time increments that you have of a period of sustained awareness where you're going to be directly facing your primordial nature, the ground of being. And so the longer that we spend investing in our practice and in our familiarity with this basic nature, the longer we can hope to have a sustained period of time of a longer chance to encounter and see and be liberated by the arising of our pure nature, the pure basic truth nature. Because a person who doesn't have any practice, it's like, the problem with that is that there's no familiarity gained in this life. So when it arises at the time of death, it arises and it passes right by us unnoticed. It arises to all beings who have Buddha nature, Sugata Garba Deshe Nyingpo. All sentient beings have this nature. So at the time of death, it arises to all. But for those who, it's almost like saying, even though we have the Buddha nature, and even though these appearances arise to us, it goes by unnoticed, so it doesn't benefit us. That's why practice is so important. It's kind of like an orphan who has lost its mother and never met its biological mother. And then one day that orphan is wandering in the desert looking for help, looking for somebody to guide them. And the mother passes by and they see the mother, but they don't know it's the mother. And so no benefit. Mother passes them by, they just keep going lost. And even not recognizing the mom, then the mom can't help them. Because in order to help them, they have to be recognition. This is my mother. And then going to the mother can guide them. So in the same way, without practice, we don't have that recognition. Without that recognition, then even though these appearances of the pure ground of being will arise to all of us, but the length of time at which we're able to remain in that state and whether or not we realize it depends entirely on the degree to which we've invested in our practice in this bardo of this life.
Hola, sola, tanga tu dene chitu tangbo le re tsusta tadanga kalasa don mado.
That's a
Alti zos dene chitu.
Shizuni.
Ni chitu ni jele de toyong.
So we've come to our break time for lunch, and we'll see you in 2 hours.
So namde ya dam je ze kwa ni thom na ni kana pham de yin je ga na je balap thuk ba ye sit pi cholen ro ba sho ya mat pa we chitra chem ba ta bo te de yin je da kun je ji so da lo jing ge wa da tam je rab dong te som shi je wa tam je jing ho kana cho dong da ge ge we za ban de kun ya zang bo cho so rab dong ho ba je ren ke ge ton de ro wa ko da tam bi chue da mo re 야, 돈이 그 반타더니 충아도 근직 된제조지 나라를 좀 상아 치고 고등이 힐 sabsangam jur chimbo nyamne la yan me thok je thikle ro che sho chewa kundo yang da lama dam dharmi chu je pala sa ta lam je yo de rab zo ne par den la me kon ba nyor tho sho la so oh la so ta tari ini ta che tang ge cheni pardo de ta she sarni ta di malam dang ini something oh tini te na yin ye na ni ya ini 그래서 담지 다지 이니마 이니 피 콩을 대바로 지지니 이게 당그 시에차베스.
So, we have already gone through the teaching on the bardo of this life, and within that, the bardo of the dream and the bardo of meditation are contained, and so we've gone through kind of a rough overview of these bardos that take place during the period of our life.
Ora so ina ta tini nga ma so yang te tam chi ge chi ene saba te so tini ta nga so ma te si chi so ro ki tor de ro che che ne tini yang te ma rimba ta chi chi te xie gi yin sa
Nos Rinpoche.
ye so da te ta nga de ma ni hu tsab je no ma la pa do de do
Nishitsabge. Odur, Nishitsabge revela.
lo so ta de ge yang ni ba de ta ri nga na zo ge ta Kini pardu ke nang sen ta tsemo milam tila milam pardu sing yora ta milam pardu sing te ta tangbo ngo zong wala ma ta ni kogni ya ma sebe parji tani milam je nang wa nyam su nywa tila sege yobres.
Nos Rinpoche. So we're going through the root text, and as we go, there's explanation of each of the pardos, and we did mention the dream pardo. That's the second, and if you're following in the book, it's page 29 in the English, 28 in the Tibetan. So this is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's the pardo of the dream, which is the intermediate period, usually at night, from the period in which you fall asleep until you wake up in the morning, and you're practicing through the dream state. And so part of the instructions in this are how to recognize the dream and how to practice through the dream practice. That's that pardo of the dream.
Ene kitang ta nga tsu milam sing de tani nga ran zo ge ani ta tik tse de ge nang wa yong ya la tani milam te tani kaya chenpo shure de yore ta sugi yang tani 다 이네 뺀라고 되네 지 약효스나 되네 다 물람들 차대요라
Yeah.
물람데 언더 마도 비인도 되네 가서 지 응어서 나이요 봐 얘네 나 양 람상 되네 가서 다지 얘네 나와테 라게 좀 마도 봐 어다 된다고 진다 되네 때 물람데 다 가서 추낭데 얘네 빼라 되네 약효도 다 공가서 응어서도 뉴지요 봐 다 물람데 됐어.
So when we talk about dreams generally, it falls within the category of this present life's appearances. And when it comes to this present life, the dream becomes something extremely important because for all of us, we can understand the dream that it seems very real. It appears to be real, but we recognize it has no inherent realness, that it is illusory. And that's why the dream becomes a most direct example or analogy of the dreamlike illusory nature, that while in the dream it seems like it's really happening and that it's really real, but then that appearance phenomena is devoid of any inherent existence. It's like unreal and insubstantial. And so that's why the dream is a perfect analogy, an example, metaphor, so to speak, for the way in which our confusion projects itself into our phenomena. So how our confused appearances.
Voilà, so pena teni ta ngaran zo chu tamje de teni chi ni rang yin je ma ro ba malam tar do malam ta bo se ta ang da teni jumi pe eni kyot de song ro ba
So, for
o ta ti
example,
ta ti nang ne teni ta ngaran zo ani malam tes 다 다다가 저변 물럼때 다다 창미게 다지 안에 랑게지 마로 버들람상 통고요래 이나야 다되게 나왔는데 대다 지과 말에 딩은이 get네 댐바래 딱바래 나저 하 거기도 앞에도 계속 나저 답에는 가르세 이네 매게 통고요래 서방 뭐섬도 용요래 락비 리겨요래 이네 다 세베치 다 아주 다람상 대치 삼로 땅도 언제 나랑 저기 물럼지 니가블라 다 다다 때다 직과 직장 다 되게 나와도 직과 직장을 해마도 물론 가서 다 ngaran 저거 뺀다 철화 물론 철화양 요래 명화양 요래 레과양 요래 대화 깨지 요래 동함 양교 요래 그 직과 직장에다 니나다 체벌이 까마까 요 말했어.
and so when it comes to the dream phenomena, everybody understands, everybody can see immediately that it is unreal. So everybody immediately sees they can get the fact that a dream is illusory, that a dream isn't real. But in comparison to the dream appearances, we think of this waking state of life as very real. And we say, oh, well, the dream is not real, but the waking state, what I experience in my waking state is very real because it's real, it's permanent, it has a true objective existence, unlike in the dream, and I can see it, it's empirically verifiable, I can touch it, I can feel, I have all of these empirical sensory experiences that show to me that this waking state is real. That's what we say to ourselves. But in reality, the dream feels very real when we are fully enraptured in it, when we are fully in the dream. We have the same kind of sense of it being our environment and our phenomena. We have real feelings. We feel happiness. We experience that. We feel pain and suffering. And we have all manner of perceptions and experiences in the dream that are identical to how we experience the life during the day.
그래서 다다 가서 이니 물람데 좀 다가서 이니 님이 바뀌어야 파르치와라 다 지고서 제 모양 대랑 바로 되고 요래스 이니 다다 그때는 가서 가서 이니 다다 닝한게 나와대 이니 다다 가서 책네 때는 가서 이니 세럽 망고 그때는 야 바뀌어야 돼 이니 다 바뀌고 왕게 양 알아 저거 낭되고 요래스 대때니 때는 기당 거서 바뀌어 이런 통을 지어봐지 되니 지금 고니 다 물론 바뀌어야 되지 서버다 버래 다디 지는 인물이 나와 바뀌어야 다 새로 망보니 마사이에 나와 대선당 되니 되게 것도 나와 돼야 에네 데스 다코 에네 가르세고 그런가다 땜반다고 지요레스
So the dream is principally what it is the habitual imprints that we have sort of gathered, our conditioning that we gather throughout the day plays itself out in the appearances of the dream. And similarly, the appearances of the waking state during the day are the habitual imprints and conditioning that we have accumulated for many previous lifetimes, playing themselves out in the appearances of the waking state. And so just as because these are conditioning that we have accrued for many lifetimes stacked one atop the other, those very strong habitual patterns, vasanas as you call them, and these vasanas, these habitual imprints that we have gathered for lifetime after lifetime, the reason why the waking state is almost like seems to be longer in duration is because we have just gathered that many habitual imprints that express themselves in the duration of our lives during the waking state. The dream experience is a sort of miniature version of that. That is, whatever habitual imprints we kind of experiences and impressions that we have during the day in our waking experience play themselves out during that short period of the dream state.
다 나란 속에 얘네 호루하게 딱지당 게지 싸와데 마렉발레 정세가라 마렉발레 얘네 마렉도 빼대 빼나다 나란 속이야 또목들이다 또목 빼나 또목세 다 니들이
맞아.
때네 니라 때네 물람 좋아나 yin 얘네 다다 나란 속고 빼나 얘네 야 또목로 왕게 때네 다 다다 나서 얘네 그래 어라 니라 때네 물람 좋아 얘네 물람 그 때네 출빈 나왔더니 물람제 나와대 요거요 빼때 나기 다 가서 말이 발라 때네 되네 춘항도 좀 춘항 때라 때니 되네 다다 가서 애니 다 다다가 애니 가서 출빈 나와서 탐지 샤르고 요레스 되네서도 공이 샤르사 대응 직관으로 차고 요레스
맞아. So, for example, the root of samsara, the cycle of conditioned existence, comes from ignorance. That's the root of our samsara, is ignorance, and ignorance is exactly that. It's unknowing. It's sleep. Sleep is the epitome of ignorance. Ignorance or bewilderment, confusion. And ignorance, lack of recognition, is the root of samsara. So sleep then, through sleep, from sleep or independence upon sleep, we have the dream phenomena. And from the dream, all the appearances that proliferate in the dream experience arise. And similarly, from ignorance, gives rise, just as sleep gives rise to dreams and dreams give rise to deluded perception and illusory dreamlike experiences, so too does ignorance give rise to confusion, and from confusion gives rise to the sort of illusory confused appearances in which we are sort of wrapped up in the samsara. But the way that they arise is the same. It's parallel. Listen.
Then Tatangaran Zopena any Mulam Sabata, Nick Sabata, Mulam Gochunam. Then it deme tomba the Yavanagi, Tatanga to lead up Pakak Jebik. In it Tatangaran Zogoya, Nazo Chunang de Yangs Sabata, then it penny, any Mulam Sabata Chiquara penetrenga to go that Hisona. Then the petty said any Tata, now I didn't lobster, now I go, me get any. Pakya Yantek Pangajore. There they touch my college Jaguar, the Tangaran Zogoya, Pakya, so Yangelo Joldo. This no matter Nick Seba, the Chipareta, Nick says on a Takoran in Mermado, but the Chipardo, bit tenderess.
That's what I'm okay. But when we wake up from the dream, when we wake up from our sleep, then all the phenomena that we fully engaged with in the dream disappears without a trace into the empty nature. And that is, it's not real. Its unrealness becomes known because we've woken up, so we're no longer at its mercy. And similarly, the present lives appearances, the confused projections that are the product or the result of our previous lives, karma and habitual impressions that are born from these karma and karmic imprints, when they are released or when we awaken into the basic space of the true nature, then just like waking from a dream and the dream phenomena dissolves into the empty nature because it has never been real to begin with, similarly, when we awaken into the basic space nature, then all the sort of appearances of our confusion disappear, dissolve. They're no more. And so, for example, if we are to die tonight, then after our death, all the storyline of this life will disappear, will subside, and all the appearances, phenomena of this present life and this present identity will dissolve and be no more, because it will be as though we awakened from last night's dream, and then no longer does that dream phenomena have any functionality. It's no longer there. And similarly, waking from the confused projections is like waking from the dream. That phenomena, those appearances that we experienced, no longer there because they'd never been real.
Dala Milam Pardo Sharviti Ninang Tamchi Deme Tongbani Semi Pakcha Yilu Chamacho Danzi Tarvi Shiba Somar Tronang Pame Jangwe Tuchiko Zakam Troko Milam Longkushin Yilu Tongzo Gumi Tant Oni Jishi Payo Tingzin Chabar Shos.
So now as for how they arise as the path, how the dreamlike state can arise as the path. The root text verses read, Kima, and this is page, for those who are following along in the book, it is page 30 and 31. Kima, when the intermediate state of dream arises for me, all that is perceived by day is emptiness without true existence. By night, in the fragile mental body born of habit patterns, rests fresh awareness free of any sense of self-identity. This is the unique opportunity to refine away careless perceptions based on confusion. The subtle channels entail realization of Nirmanakaya, while the dream state entails realization of pure Sambhogakaya. While our mental bodies are illusory, empty forms, with our realization of the significance of this, may our subsequent awareness arise as vigilant meditative absorption.
Ini tangaran tuku malam de yang ini jangwa ge kapso sta yang ngaso ini semi kapso ngaran so yang ramang mi do.
Nice.
Ini nyingmo kapso yang tese koto ramang yo ba. Tende
No.
song nyingmo la chitang ge ta malam jang bi kapso ta nyingmo ge ta wa de tam chi malam ta ba yin isate malam yi sanga tu chawa khare che ge yana. Malam na ni khala sa go malam na ni khompa je go malam na ni yin sa thorbe na wa de tam chi pena ta koto malam go thorwa na wa de chi kwa yin sam chi no de dus chin de tambo sam lo de des tang go re so mo des.
And so in this dream then, when we're practicing during the day, the dream yoga practices, because remember, once it's nighttime and you're already in the dream, there's less sort of control. The mind has kind of less control than when you're in the waking state in terms of access to your full conscious ability to kind of train your mind. That's why the training of the dream takes place during the day when you're not dreaming. And how you train, one of the ways is by just being in the state of recognition that all that you do and experience in the present waking state during the day is actually you're just dreaming it all. This is just a dream, reminding yourself, I'm dreaming. This is just a dream. So when you're eating, I'm dreaming that I'm eating. When you're walking, I'm dreaming that I'm walking. And everything that you do and experience, you have reminder of this mindful awareness that I am dreaming, I'm dreaming. And that's part of the dream training for when you actually are engaging in the practice at night.
Wala so ta yang tini ta malam jang ya gi senang usu jang wa te kaps ta kar che go se ta ngara zo pena ngonro nyam ne cheng dra bu chi na ta che nga zo lamin nam jur sa ta tini malam te ming ba ta malam sar bo ming ba malam ngo she ba tini nga zo hinja lab so samni phe ba te hun to tang ya de ka che bo res.
No, so how you practice then, like as you're to actually be able to apply this in the practice at night when you're dreaming, is like as part of, like, for example, the ngundro practice. If you're working on your ngundro practice, your preliminary, you start to learn like training for in the Guru Yoga. You supplicate the Lama and you pray in the Guru Yoga. You visualize the Guru, the Lama there, and you supplicate, please grant blessings for me to have clear and vivid dreams, and grant your blessings for me to recognize the dream. And so you supplicate in that way before you go to sleep. And that sort of sets the intention, sort of like manifesting and setting that intention for being able to recognize the dream.
Ta nga to ki chitang ta sang ta de ji sang tang ro chemo melam de ro ong yo ma ro nga so kar che so de ina te ten de ma res tini phen ba de ngo to tang yo na tini ko pe ta da de ge yang chi nga so de korang na ta tang zeng ke to ya ni ba jo res pe na ngo ba me te so chi so yo ma res kozo 다 트레이닝 좀 chen 남세라고 드리젤 상가 산인 로고서 그 돈업들도 많이 예하다 nga 드레서 로고를 nga 접접 제거 사람들 예그래 예네 것도 딱다라 항로래 어느 답변에 찍된 되려래 야 배연다지 쉬어버기나 답변에 잡지 전제를 못 정하는 거라마 공추도 짜는 야고요 말 차를 추서요 말 눈을 추서 야지요 말 그래서는 공원되는 거 뺏겨서 추서 숨발라 따따라 것도 다 행로래 koto tele ta khora kom sare khora teso ne khora pe de tik to la nga se taro break de jo to tene tak da koto ta ta dong ya kala do khon na ma ke de bi yo ko bi de che ro de la tene mo la he ba ta ya de ko ten ten de la tene ko tene ta kholo pe de che se ene ke che mo de te ji ko ni de la ya ta ka se ko te chi tu do ko tang zeng ke tu do
So you might think like, well, I'm not going to be able to have, how am I going to be able to have control over my dreams? Because once I'm asleep and I'm dreaming, I'm kind of at the mercy of my subconscious and I don't have that level of control. But this isn't guaranteed. This isn't certain, because if you set the intention and you have very directed intention before going to sleep, then that can imbue you with much more control over the dream. Like you can have awareness in the dream while you're dreaming. And this is something that there's plenty of examples of that. Like one example is in Tibet. You know, it used to be in Tibet, like we didn't have clocks, we didn't have like watches or anything. So how did these yogis then know what time it was? They want to get up at 3 a.m. in the morning. They don't have an alarm clock that they can set, but then they set their intention. So they sort of like, they focus, they cast their intention, very focused intention, manifesting it. And they say, oh, I've got to wake up at 3 a.m. I have something to do. And then they set the intention, they go to sleep exactly 3 a.m., they wake up without any alarm clock because they have sort of like directed their minds in that state. And similarly, like that's one example. And then another example of is Gyabje, His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche, my Lama, my teacher. He didn't have a clock or a watch. He didn't wear a watch. He didn't have a single clock in his home. But every morning, without fail, he would wake up right at 3 a.m. And, you know, for the rest of us, it's like even with all these alarm clocks trying to wake us up, it's still like we can barely muster the ability, the willpower to get up at 3 a.m. We're still kind of feeling sluggish and tired. But His Holiness Khyentse Rinpoche, you know, like no clocks, no alarm clocks, just up and clear right at 3 a.m. And this part of like the practice of casting that intention and casting that focus has tremendous influence on the ability for us to have more level of control and willpower, even in the dream state. So there's a lot of power in casting the intention like that.
그래서 다 지금 수치 양아 저 냠내 제비 값서 되네 제랑가 다다 이니 양 독냐당 때 생게 냐다 다바 되네 스치니다 강들냐 되네 닝게 기제드나 아지 곰제네 아텔 셈존제 되네 다텔라 고토 되네 배치세 이니 두스제 되네 칼레 되네 코페네 되네 다 당보 니 투고ጆ로 되네 니 칼레 사본다고 되는 값 되네 말람데 용고요 되네 대 값 되네 데이터 양내 양도 되네 다 말람데 당보 말람 임바 ngo에서 중요지 용거를 다 데라 코도페네 카시 망체와데 다 당보지 쯤념라고 쯤승이든 ям승승이 줘라 다 쯤승에서도 직변에 다 젠생이 대송원라고 제 드라게 대바라고 양랑바라고 되네제가 대라고 제가서 홉티칼 다 띠말람레 삼바라고 제더니 심바지와래 카르테 생송바이나 티니 땅에 안항데서도 진짜데 예서 코말람라 오다 페나 대다고데야 냠 드레 치킨다 당봉 왜 생생이다 말람데 말람 시바이나 되는 거 생생이요레스
That's what I'm saying. And so for the actual practice of what to practice in the dream state, well, first of all, the instructions say that you should try to go to sleep in the most conducive posture. So for example, the sleeping lion posture. And you are to visualize yourself in your heart, visualize a white ah syllable. And sort of as you're going to sleep in the sleeping lion posture and you visualize the ah syllable in your heart, and you just kind of like rest your awareness there as you're starting to fall asleep. And the dreams arise once you've fallen into a deep enough sleep for the dream to arise. And so just fall asleep sort of with your awareness on that ah syllable in your heart. Then you fall asleep and the dream phenomena arises, and the first step is you have to be able to recognize that you are dreaming, the dream to be a dream. So, and that recognition is really mostly like it comes like if you're having a nightmare, like a really sort of volatile dream, like you're being chased by wild animals or you're in some sort of immediate danger in the dream, a scary, rough nightmare type dream, then suddenly you remember that it's just a dream. And then if you're able to sustain that recognition, then there's no more fear. All the terror and fear of the nightmare goes away because you know it's not real. You know you're just dreaming. So in any case, the first step is to recognize the dream.